Hi everyone, and welcome back to Paranormal M. Tonight we have another set of paranormal stories for you. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, and if you like the stories, give the video a like. We're starting with a story from a former night shift worker at Buttrey's in Great Falls. One night after work, his truck wouldn't start, so he decided to walk behind the building instead of waiting around. What happened next is why he says he never goes back there alone. Settle in, and I hope you all sleep well. Welcome everyone to my Mr. M channel. I hope your night is going well and you're listening from somewhere calm and comfortable. Before we get into tonight's stories, please turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. And if you've ever had an unexplained paranormal experience, you can send it to me. Our first story tonight comes from someone who believed in these things for a long time, but never had a real experience until one strange night out in the country. What happened there stayed with them for years. So settle in, take it easy, and sleep well tonight. I don't take the service road behind the old grocery building on 10th Avenue South anymore. Not after midnight. Not by myself. And I mean that with my whole chest. This was back in December of '97, one of those Montana nights where the cold felt personal. The river was throwing off steam like something alive was breathing under it. I was working the late shift, stocking shelves at the old store, and I clocked out a little after 2 in the morning. My pickup wouldn't start. The battery was gone. Frozen, dead, useless. I remember standing there with my keys in my hand, just staring at it like disappointment had 4 tires. I didn't want to go back inside and sit under those buzzing break room lights waiting for a tow truck, so I decided I'd walk the back way. Cut behind the building, head toward the college side, then circle home from there. I'd done it before. Plenty of times. That night, I got maybe halfway down that narrow drive behind the loading dock when the big security light overhead burst. Not flickered. Not dimmed. Burst. Glass scattered across the concrete, and the sound of it was so sharp it made my teeth lock together. Then everything went quiet. No cars out on 10th Avenue. No wind. No distant engines. Just my boots breaking the crust of ice under me. And then I saw them. There were 3 figures standing near the old rail spur at the end of the drive. They were tall. Too tall. Taller than the trailers backed up to the dock. 8 feet, maybe more. Thin in a way that didn't look human, like shadows had been stretched until they almost tore. No faces, no clothes. Nothing I could call skin. Just the shape of people, cut out of the dark. And their feet weren't touching the ground. They were hanging there, maybe half a foot above the ice, still as fence posts. I couldn't move. I couldn't even get my breath right. Then the one in the middle tilted its head. But not the way a person does. It turned slowly, almost curious, like an animal listening for something under the floorboards. Only it didn't stop. Its head kept going farther and farther until it was completely upside down. And that blank place where a face should have been was aimed right at me. Then it raised one arm. That arm was too long, bent in too many places, and it pointed past me, back toward the store. Back toward the lights. I didn't look behind me. Something in me knew not to. I just ran. I ran straight through the parking lot and out onto 10th Avenue South. A truck driver laid on his horn, and I swear he missed me by less than a few feet. I didn't stop until a patrol car found me 2 blocks away, bent over on the sidewalk, trying to breathe. The officer kept asking what happened. All I could say was, they were counting. He said, "Counting what?" And I told him, The windows. The lights in the windows. They were counting which ones were still on. When they got to mine, it pointed. The police went back there and checked the drive. They didn't find anyone. No tracks in the frost. No marks. Nothing. But every bulb behind that building was blown out. The dock lights, the lot lights, all of them. Glass was scattered everywhere, like they had all popped at the exact same moment. I quit that week. Moved out near Fairfield not long after. Told myself distance would help. Told myself whatever I saw was tied to that building, that old back drive, that miserable hour of the morning. But it wasn't. I work days now. I don't stay out late if I can help it. Still, every few months, right around 2:11 in the morning, my wife wakes up and says she smells something burning. Not smoke exactly, more like old wires getting hot inside a wall. Then she looks out the bedroom window, and there's one of them standing in the field across from our house. 9 feet tall, floating just above the ground. Its head turned all the way upside down, looking at our window, counting. She doesn't wake me anymore. I asked her not to, because I told her the truth. If you look back, it knows someone is home, and then it starts counting your windows. I don't know what happens when it runs out. That's the part I'm afraid of. I'm really sorry you went through that. I know how awful sleep paralysis can feel, because it happened to me once when I was a kid, and for years I honestly thought the fear of it had burned some kind of warning system into my brain, like, never again. For a long time, it really didn't happen again. Almost 20 years passed. Then, a few years back, it started coming around again. Not often, thankfully. Maybe 5 or 6 times total over several years. But every time it happens, it feels just as real and just as heavy. When it starts, I usually wake up right away, but I can't move. And I don't exactly see things with my eyes. It's more like I see them in my mind. Faces, presences, something that feels like it's pressing down on me, holding me there. It doesn't feel like a normal dream. It feels like my imagination has been hijacked by something that doesn't belong there. I've tried all kinds of things to get out of it. I've tried forcing myself to move, but that usually just turns into this weak, twitchy struggle. I've tried calming down and falling back asleep, but the fear makes that impossible. I've tried telling whatever it is to leave me alone. I've even tried getting angry and pushing back with everything I had. None of that really worked. The only thing that has consistently broken it for me is calling on the name of Jesus. And I mean that sincerely. Every time I set my mind on saying his name, it feels like something resists it. Not just fear, not just hesitation. It feels like something is trying to keep me from getting the words out. I can usually speak a little during these episodes, though not clearly. I've managed to say things like, "Let me go," or "I'm not afraid of you," or "You don't get to have me." But none of that ever seemed to change anything. Then I start trying to say Jesus' name, and it's different. It feels blocked at first, like the word has weight to it. But once I finally get it out, the whole thing breaks. The pressure lifts. My body comes back to me. The fear starts draining out of the room. There was one time, though, when it didn't stop immediately. That one scared me more than the others. In my mind, there was this pale, wide-eyed face staring right at me. It had this strange, almost alien look to it, and the presence behind it felt stronger than usual. The first time I said Jesus' name, it didn't fully end, but it weakened enough that I could say it again. And the second time, it was over. Completely gone. That one felt different because after I said his name the first time, whatever it was felt angry, like I had heard it somehow, like it wanted to push back harder because I had dared to call for help. So the second time wasn't brave or bold. It wasn't me trying to sound tough. It was just a scared, honest plea. And still, it worked. I know this is just my experience. I'm not a sleep expert, and I don't claim to have all the answers. I've only had enough of these moments to know what has helped me personally. Some people explain it as the brain getting stuck between sleep and waking, and I understand that. Maybe there's a physical side to it. Maybe there's a neurological explanation for part of it. But for me, it has never felt that simple. What I can say is this: calling on Jesus has been the only thing that has truly helped me in those moments. And if it doesn't seem to work the first time, I'd say keep calling on him. I really hope you find peace, safety, and rest again. I'll keep you in my thoughts, and I genuinely hope things get lighter for you soon. God bless. It wasn't exactly creepy, not in the way people usually mean when they talk about haunted places. It was more like this heavy, irritated energy hanging in the air, like something unseen was constantly pressing on people, nudging them toward anger, arguments, and conflict. I had a lot of friends out there, and I noticed the same pattern again and again. Some people seemed to get pulled into it. Others didn't fully give in, but once that door was open, it was like they were being pushed around by it. And honestly, with Pennsylvania's history, I can understand why the place feels the way it does. There's so much old energy there, and the cemeteries are everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Back in California, cemeteries feel more contained, like they have their own designated spaces. You can drive for half an hour and not see one, but around Allegheny, it felt like you couldn't go 5 minutes without passing one. It gave the whole area this strange, layered feeling, like the past was sitting right there beside you. There are plenty of recorded hauntings in Pennsylvania too, but my own experiences there were overwhelming. I know some people will doubt it or explain it away, and that's fine. But in 2019, after years of dealing with paranormal experiences already, I went through something that changed me. Within about 3 months, I experienced 2 suicides where I had been one of the last people in contact with the person. And if you know anything about certain spiritual beliefs around suicide, people who are extremely close to an event like that, especially if they're already spiritually open, can sometimes attract what some call suicide spirits. These are spirits believed to follow people and try to tempt them toward that same ending. I had several experiences with those kinds of spirits. Over time, they eventually left, but it felt like they left a line of communication open. After that, I started having more encounters, more conversations, more moments where I could feel something trying to come through. At a certain point, when you get deeper into this kind of knowledge, whether people believe it or not, a lot of practitioners agree that human beings can act almost like radios or conduits. Spirits can tune into people and communicate through them, especially when someone is sensitive to it. And one of the most intense experiences I ever had with that happened in Allegheny. A lot of us who study this believe spirits interact with people every day on some level. It might show up as a sudden emotional shift, a change in someone's energy, or a person acting completely unlike themselves out of nowhere. I've seen people become irrational in an instant, like something just flipped a switch inside them. There was one night in Allegheny that still stays with me. My wife and I were visiting some friends at their dorm, and one of their roommates had been slipping into a pretty serious drinking habit. Her roommates told us that when she blacked out, she would act like she was possessed. She wouldn't remember any of it afterward. They said she would come out of her room with this empty, almost black-eyed stare, urinate on the floor, and become violently aggressive for no clear reason. My wife, Lana, and I were both sensitive to that kind of thing, and that night the energy in the dorm became too much. We stepped into the bathroom together just to get away from it for a minute. But once we were in there, we both got hit with this sudden panic. It came out of nowhere. Then, for some reason, we both felt this strong urge to turn off the lights. So we did. And in the darkness, we both saw them. 3 spirits rushing toward us, like they were trying to scare us or attack us. It happened so fast, but it was unmistakable. We both felt it. We both saw it. Afterward, we told our friends what happened, and they admitted there had been other strange things going on in the dorm, too. Things that had nothing to do with the roommates drinking. That confirmed what we already felt. Something was wrong in that place. But it didn't end there. Whatever we encountered that night followed us back to our apartment in Ohio. We already had some passive spiritual activity there, but this was different. It started escalating. Eventually, it got to the point where Lana began involuntarily channeling something, and that turned into what I can only describe as a possession. She had never experienced anything like that before. She wasn't even a believer up until then. But after that, she was. Bingo. That is exactly the feeling. When it's bad, I mean really bad. It starts at the back of your scalp. Then it rushes down your neck and spine, almost like a current, and spreads into your shoulders, all the way down to your elbows. It's that gut feeling, but stronger, sharper, like some inner Geiger counter clicking over something malevolent. Your energetic self is telling you, very clearly, that the place isn't just wrong. Whatever is there knows you're there. It has awareness. It has intent. And if there's someone nearby that it can influence, it can use them to look at you. Since I was a kid, there was one particular stretch along the Michigan lakeshore that I dreaded. It was in a sunny, wealthy area with beautiful lawns and clean streets, the kind of place that looks harmless from the outside. But there was this spot where Sheridan Road made a sudden hard left turn, and every time I went through there, my whole body reacted. For years, I thought maybe it was just the abruptness of the turn. Then I started looking into older maps, First Nation maps, early settlement records. South of that bend had been a major seasonal village. North of it, right where the road turned, had been a significant burial ground. That spot still has a different kind of energy. It buzzes. Years later, I became very interested in the First Nation tribes that had lived around my home. Some of them no longer exist as they once did. I read about the Fox and Sauk, about Black Hawk, and about how his ancestral lands were taken through wrongs done on both sides of a table where power was not equal. I admired him as a leader, and one weekend I planned to visit the area tied to his home camp near the Illinois and Mississippi rivers. I wanted to camp nearby, trace part of the route his people followed during the Black Hawk War, and just sit with the history of it. But trying to leave was impossible. It was one thing after another, delay after delay. Little problems that normally would not have stopped me kept stacking up until it was simply too late to go. I was frustrated, but I was also aware. Something I could not see and could not explain felt like it was physically blocking me. To this day, after decades of life, I have never felt anything exactly like that before or since. It was as if no matter what I did, nothing would help, because I was not supposed to make that trip. So I stayed home. I spent the weekend with my family, and we did good, ordinary things together. When I went back to work, a friend of mine came up to me. I'll call her Mara. She was half First Nations and had grown up on a reservation. Big eyes, big smile, even bigger heart. She looked at me and asked, very directly, "Where were you going to go?" I started naming the places I had planned to visit. Each time she said, "No." Another place. "No." Another. "No." Then I said, "Bad Axe, Wisconsin." And she lit up. Yes. Then she told me her story. That same long weekend, Mara and her boyfriend had gone riding out toward western Illinois. They stopped at a well-known family biker bar to get food, have a drink, and listen to music. While they were there, a woman Mara had never met walked right up to her. The woman said, "You look like the kind of person I'm supposed to tell this to." Then she sat down and told Mara what had happened earlier that day. She had been riding on the back of her husband's motorcycle. Another couple, longtime friends of theirs, was riding with them on a second bike. They were heading south along the Mississippi River Road, passing near Bad Axe, the area where Black Hawk and his band were finally cornered by militia, the U.S. Army, and a gunboat. Many did not survive. Many were starving. Many could not survive the river. As they passed that place, the woman suddenly started screaming. She was grabbing at her husband, jerking him, telling him to stop, to watch out, to get out of the way. Because in the road ahead of them, coming straight at them, were two First Nations warriors. Young men, powerful, on horseback. They were galloping up the road, charging directly toward the motorcycles with long lances lowered for a kill strike. The woman nearly pulled her husband off the bike, trying to make him stop or move. Both motorcycles swerved to the side of the road. Everyone was shouting, "What are you doing? Are you crazy? Didn't you see them?" "See who?" "The two men on horses in the middle of the road coming right at us with lances." Then there was silence. After a few minutes, everyone calmed down enough to talk. And it turned out both women had seen the same thing. Two warriors at full gallop, lances forward, one passing on either side of the bikes. But when the second woman looked back after they had passed, there was nothing there. No riders, no horses, nothing. They continued on, shaken, and later that day the first woman found Mara in that biker bar and told her the story without being asked. Then they talked politely for a few minutes, and the woman left. Mara stopped talking and looked me straight in the eyes, deeply, like she was weighing something she already knew. Then she said, "This has something to do with you, doesn't it?" About a year later, I no longer worked at that company. I was driving back from Minneapolis with my family when we passed near Bad Axe. It was winter. There was about a foot of fresh snow on the ground. I decided to finally go see it. It was sad there, but also beautiful, peaceful, quiet after the snowstorm. It was midday, no wind at all. As we drove in, bare trees lined the road. My wife was sitting next to me. And then we both saw it. In a tree ahead of us and slightly to the right, maybe at the 1 o'clock position, something moved. It was about 3/4 of the way up the tree, near a large limb. My wife jumped in her seat. She pointed with one hand, hit my arm with the other, and grabbed me. "What is that?" I'll be honest. I don't know. It started as movement. Something not white, but grayish. As it moved from left to right, it seemed to get larger or fuller, almost like it was expanding from all its edges at once, filling itself in, but never quite reaching a complete shape. It moved maybe 10 or 20 feet over several seconds, from the middle of the tree toward the outer edge. At its largest, it looked 4 or 5 feet across. The closest way I can describe it is a 3/4 sphere, like the shell of a sphere with 1/4 missing, so you could see both the outside and the curve of the inside. Then it just faded out. I stopped the truck as my wife yelled. We were near the end of the park road, not far from the Mississippi, close to where I believe the worst of it likely happened. My wife was babbling a little. I saw that. You saw that. What the heck was that? She does not swear, so even that told me how scared she was. I could feel her fear rising. So I lied. It was a soft lie, but still a lie. I said, it was a snowy owl. Snowy owls do not really belong there like that, and what we saw was not an owl. But it was daytime, and it was the only explanation I could think of fast enough to help her calm down. She breathed out and said, "Yeah, that's what it was, a snowy owl." And she never brought it up again. We left after a few minutes. I will not go there again. For a while, I tried to explain it away. A puff of snow, a shadow, light on the windshield. But none of those explanations ever truly satisfied me. Then, about a month later, something happened. It was late at night. I was sitting in my truck with the lights off and the engine off, checking my phone before going inside. When I finished and looked up through the windshield, I saw something dimly lit moving through the air. I froze. Then I got out and looked up. I recognized it. It was the thing from Bad Axe. But this time, in the darkness, I could see it clearly. It was structured light, self-luminous, dim but distinct. It was fully formed now, a sphere, roughly 5 feet across. It was not rolling. It had orientation. It was moving with purpose. It was maybe 40 or 50 feet up, traveling northeast from the southwest. But it was not moving steadily like something carried by wind. It would pause slightly, then make sharp little turns. 10 degrees here, 20 there, then back again. And the wind was coming straight out of the east. This thing was crossing the wind, cutting across it. I watched it for maybe half a minute as it moved across the lot. Then it was just gone. Sometime later, I connected with an older couple who were Lakota. They were kind and polite, and they agreed to hear me out. I was hoping they might offer some guidance. We did not get very far. One of them excused herself. I do not know if she went to get something for herself or to do a blessing, or both. I had drawn what I saw at Bad Axe and what I saw above my truck a month later, hundreds of miles away. When they looked at the drawing, they both said the same thing at the same time. Actually, they blurted it. That's a medicine lodge. I guess I'll start with the first strange thing I can really remember. I was around 15 at the time, and my dad had this old fish tank set up in the living room. I'd be sitting there watching TV or sometimes standing nearby folding laundry, and every now and then I'd catch something out of the corner of my eye. It was like the tank light would suddenly dim, almost as if somebody had walked right in front of it. But when I turned to look, nobody was there. At first, I tried to brush it off. You know, reflections, shadows, maybe my eyes playing tricks on me. That's what you tell yourself when something doesn't quite fit. Years went by, and when I was about 22, I moved into an apartment with my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, and her roommate. One afternoon, we were lying in bed, just relaxing, and out of nowhere, I heard a man's voice say, very clearly, "Leave now." I'll never forget it. It wasn't muffled. It wasn't distant. It sounded like someone had leaned right up next to my ear and said it with force. I wasn't exactly terrified in that moment, but I was definitely confused. I looked over at my girlfriend and asked her if she had heard that. She told me she had heard something, but she couldn't make out the words. For me, there was no question. I knew exactly what I heard. Not much else happened in that apartment, at least not that I remember clearly. But there was one morning, around 3 a.m., when she was driving me to work. She told me she had woken up during the night while I was asleep, and something had been speaking to her in a language she didn't recognize. That one bothered me more than the voice I heard myself. It still gives me chills thinking about it. Fast forward about 9 or 10 years. By then, we were living in a different house. My wife and our son were asleep in the room next to me, and I was in the guest bedroom. It was probably around 11 at night. The room light was off, but the TV was on, so there was enough light to see down most of the hallway. I was sitting on the bed, scrolling on my phone, when I noticed movement on the hallway floor out of the corner of my eye. I looked up. Nothing. So I went back to my phone, and a few seconds later, I saw it again. This time, I didn't look directly at it right away. I tried to focus on it through my peripheral vision, because every time I looked straight at it, it disappeared. And that's when I saw what I can only describe as a woman in a pale nightgown crawling in a circle on the hallway floor. I know how that sounds. I really do. But I was seeing it. After a moment, she stood up. Then she started walking in that same slow circle in the hallway. Around and around, just moving in this strange, unnatural way. Then she stopped. And she looked right at me. The second she did, she sprinted toward the bedroom door. I mean full speed. Right as she reached the doorway, I threw my hand over and turned on the light. And she was gone. I sat there completely frozen, asking myself if that had actually just happened. The hair on my neck was standing straight up, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to get out of my chest. I still live in that same house now, and every once in a while, something strange still happens. There's a desk chair in my bedroom, and one night I woke up to it squeaking, like someone was sitting in it and rocking back and forth. Just as I became aware of the sound, something bumped against the side of my bed and hit my foot. Another time, I woke up to what I can only describe as a woman's laugh turning into a scream. It sounded cruel, almost angry. Thankfully, nothing has ever physically hurt me, and most of the time I don't feel like I'm in real danger. But I also can't honestly say these experiences feel harmless. They feel like something is there, and every so often, it wants me to notice. So, my family's had a narrowboat for more than 50 years now. It's one of those things that's always just been part of us, really. And over the years, we've had the odd, strange moment on the canals, the kind of thing you laugh off at first and then think about later, when everything's gone quiet. But this is the one I still can't explain. There are plenty of ghost stories around the canals, especially around the tunnels. And honestly, it makes sense. Some of those places have seen accidents, cave-ins, drownings, all sorts of grim history tucked into the brickwork. This happened when my dad, Martin, and I were taking our boat through Blisworth Tunnel. We'd done it countless times before, so it wasn't anything new to us. We were moving along steadily when we saw the headlamp of another boat entering from the far end. Nothing strange about that at first. The lamp wasn't especially bright, but neither was ours. That's just how it is sometimes. As we carried on, we could see the light coming closer, so we slowed down a bit, getting ready to pass. Blisworth Tunnel is wide enough for 2 narrowboats, but only just. There's really no room to be careless unless you fancy scraping paint and swapping a few sharp words in the dark. The other boat's light seemed to be about 200 yards ahead, maybe a little more, and it looked like it was sitting right in the middle of the tunnel, We could just about make out the shape of the bow behind the lamp. Then the light stopped moving. We figured the other boat had stopped to let us come through first. Maybe their headlamp was mounted off-center, we thought, because the boat still looked like it was dead in the middle. Odd, maybe, but not impossible. Then, after we'd gone another little stretch, the light started fading. At that point, we wondered if they were having trouble. Maybe engine problems, maybe electrical. So I went carefully along the gunwale toward the front of our boat, keeping my eyes on that light the whole time. I wanted to be ready to call out to them once we were close enough. Dad and I were both watching it. The headlamp was still there, weak and dim, and behind it, I could see what looked like the dark outline of the front of the boat. It wasn't drifting to one side. It was still right there in the middle. Then the lamp flickered and went out. I was close enough by then that I could still just make out the shape of the bow, or at least I thought I could. So I signaled back to Dad, basically warning him that we might be about to bump a dead boat in the tunnel. We were both expecting our own headlamp to catch it at any second. But it never did. There was no boat. Nothing in front of us. Nothing to the side. No sound, no movement, no engine, no voices, no ripple from another hull. Just the tunnel, our boat, and our own light crawling over wet brick. When we got out the other end, we saw a fisherman sitting there, so we asked him if any boats had come out before us in the last half hour. He said no. He told us he'd been there for most of the day, around 8 hours, and we were the first boat he'd seen either entering or leaving. That's when it really hit me, because looking back, the other boat had been completely silent. Normally, in a tunnel like that, you hear everything. Engines bounce off the walls. People talking echoes ahead of them. Even small sounds carry. But all we'd heard was ourselves. We never came up with a sensible explanation. We've been through Blisworth since, and plenty of other tunnels too, but nothing like that has ever happened again. And I still think about that little fading light, sitting there in the dark, waiting for us. I had an imaginary friend when I was little. His name was Milo. My mom still brings him up sometimes, usually with this soft little laugh, because apparently Milo and I were always getting into some kind of adventure. My dad says I was a sweet kid, a good kid, but every now and then I'd do something completely out of character and then calmly blame it on Milo. Both of my parents remember how much I talked to him. Not just here and there either. I mean constantly, like he was sitting right beside me, listening and answering. But the strange part was, whenever they tried to play along and include him, the way parents sometimes do, I'd look at them like they had missed something obvious. Then I'd giggle and say something like, Milo can't hold that. His body isn't real. So, in my little kid mind, he was real. He was there. Just not in the way everyone else was. Years went by. I grew up, started my own family, and eventually ended up living in that same childhood house again. My mom sold it to us when we were ready to settle down, and it felt kind of sweet at the time, raising my kids in the rooms where I had once been small. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my children. They were 4, 3, and 1 then. We were having lunch. Nothing unusual, just the normal, noisy little chaos of kids and plates and crumbs everywhere. Then my oldest looked at me with these sad, serious eyes and said, "Mommy, can you make Milo a plate too? He looks really hungry." I just sat there for a second, trying to understand what she had said. I asked, "Who's Milo, honey?" She pointed toward the front door and said, "The little boy over there. He plays with me sometimes, but he always leaves when you come in. He looks really hungry, Mommy." I turned and looked toward the door. There was no one there. So So I turned back to her and smiled, trying to keep my voice calm. "There's nobody there, sweetheart. Go ahead and eat your lunch, okay?" And she said, very matter-of-factly, "Yeah, he said you can't see him anymore." Then she looked back toward the door, lifted her hand, and said, "Bye, Milo." That was the moment I remembered. Milo had been my imaginary friend in this same house, when I was around the same age she was right then. After that, I started looking into the history of the house. I couldn't find anything about a child dying there or any kind of tragedy connected to the place. But there's an old cemetery across the street, and eventually I thought, well, it couldn't hurt to look. So one day I took the kids on a walk. We wandered through the cemetery, and I read a few of the names out loud to them. We picked wildflowers, and the younger ones stayed near the stroller. Then suddenly, my oldest let go of the stroller handle and took off between the headstones. She wasn't running randomly. That's what I remember most. She moved like she knew exactly where she was going, weaving between the stones with this bright little purpose. Then she stopped in front of an older grave, much older than the ones we had been looking at. She started clapping, all excited, and turned back to me. "It's Milo," she called. "This is his bed." I got this cold, strange feeling all over me. I walked over, and there on the headstone was the name Milo. The dates were May 1904 to September 1910. We had found him. I asked my daughter how she knew it was his, because she couldn't read yet. She just looked at me and said she had seen him standing beside it. After that, we made an extra little plate for Milo at meals until she stopped seeing him. But not long after she stopped talking about him, her younger sister started mentioning a little boy named Milo. And then, over the years, each of my girls had him too, always around the ages of 3 or 4, and then he would fade away sometime around 5 or 6. My youngest is getting close to the age where Milo usually disappears, and honestly, when he's gone for good, I think part of me will miss him. This isn't the only strange story I have from that house, but it's one of the ones I hold closest. Look, what I'm about to share isn't easy for me to talk about. For a long time, I didn't even know how to explain it without feeling that cold pressure in my chest all over again. It became one of those moments in life where everything splits into before and after. I was 18 when it happened. Back then, I was too curious for my own good, and I let my friends push me into things I should have stayed far away from. One night, mostly out of curiosity, I ended up browsing through some strange Telegram groups. They were the kind of places where people shared disturbing videos, accidents, gore, things you know deep down you shouldn't be watching. At first, it was unsettling, but not exactly surprising. Just dark internet stuff. But then I came across one group with a name that made it sound like anything could be posted there. I clicked in, and there were all kinds of strange videos. Some were bizarre, some were graphic, some had symbols and weird edits. Then I saw one video that immediately made me feel uncomfortable. The thumbnail had strange markings on it, almost like occult symbols, and something about it felt wrong before I even opened it. I remember thinking, I should leave. This could be illegal. And I should have listened to that thought. But curiosity got the better of me. When I clicked the video, I realized within seconds that it was something I never should have seen. It was disturbing, illegal, and deeply wrong. But then, without warning, the footage shifted. Strange symbols appeared across the screen, symbols that looked like witchcraft or some kind of ritual writing. In the background, I could hear voices whispering or praying in a language I didn't recognize. That was when I felt it. A heavy, sick feeling in my stomach. Not normal fear, not disgust. Something deeper. It felt like my body understood danger before my mind could. I closed everything, deleted the app, and tried to tell myself it was just shock, just guilt, just my imagination punishing me for looking at something I shouldn't have. But that night, things got worse. I went to bed and I had the most vivid dream I've ever had in my life. At least, I hope it was a dream. In it, I was walking out of my bedroom and moving slowly through the hallway of my house. Everything looked exactly the way it did in real life. The walls, the shadows, the silence. I walked all the way to the bathroom at the end of the hall. When I opened the door, the toilet was right in front of me, and the shower was off to the side. Then I heard a voice. "Hello." It was quiet, but it felt close. Too close. I turned to my right, toward the shower, and there was a little boy standing there. He was wearing a white robe or gown, and his face, I still don't like remembering it. His skin was pale, almost gray. Dark veins showed beneath it, and he had this awful smile stretched across his face. It wasn't playful. It wasn't human. It was the kind of smile that makes your blood turn cold, because you know there is nothing innocent behind it. I stepped back almost by instinct. Then I woke up. Or at least, I think I woke up. My face was wet with cold sweat, and my whole body felt like it had been thrown into pure survival mode. I've never considered myself easy to scare. I'm not the kind of person who jumps at every noise or believes every shadow means something. But that night, my body betrayed me. It reacted like something real had been standing right in front of me. I reached for my phone. The time was 3:33 a.m. Somehow, I eventually fell asleep again, though I don't remember how. The next morning, someone knocked on my bedroom door. It was a neighbor from nearby, and she asked me if I had been walking around the house during the night. I told her no. Then she said she'd heard footsteps in the hallway for hours. Back and forth, especially near the bathroom. She said the sound kept her awake almost the entire night. That was the moment I stopped trying to convince myself it was only a dream. After that, everything started falling apart. For weeks, I couldn't sleep properly. I would wake up suddenly at the same time, 3:33 a.m., gasping like I had forgotten how to breathe. It felt like something invisible was pulling me out of sleep every night. And little by little, my life collapsed. My work suffered. My studies suffered. My money situation got worse. My mental health dropped. Even my physical health started slipping away from me. Before all of this, I had a routine. I went to the gym, I ate well, I studied, I worked, I had goals, I had energy. I was always trying to become better in every way I could. Then suddenly, I didn't want to do anything. It felt like someone had drained the life out of me. Years have passed since that night, and I'm still trying to recover. I have good days now, but every time I feel like I'm finally getting back on my feet, something seems to come along and knock me down again. I don't know what happened to me. Maybe it was trauma. Maybe it was my mind reacting to something horrible I saw. Maybe I opened a door I should have never gone near. Or maybe something really did follow me home. I'm sharing this because I still don't have answers. And honestly, part of me is scared I never will. There are a lot of strange stories tied to the house I grew up in. When my brother and I were little, things seemed much more active there. Over the years, it settled down quite a bit, but back then, it felt like the house had its own quiet pulse. And just to give a little context, my family isn't religious. None of us are. We're very science-minded people, which is probably why these experiences have stuck with us so much. We're not eager to label everything a ghost or a spirit. It's more that some things happened that we still can't explain, and that makes them hard to forget. Most of the strange things happened inside the house, but this one didn't. My dad and I have always been night owls. When I was a teenager, we used to go on late summer drives together. We'd roll the windows down, let the night air come in, and just talk about anything and everything. This was when we had phones, but service would disappear pretty easily once you got out into the back roads. My dad, being my dad, always kept an old satellite GPS in the trunk. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he still has one tucked away somewhere. One night, it must have been around 2 in the morning, we were driving through a rural area about 20 minutes from home. He had a general idea of where we were, but I think he wanted the quickest route back. So he pulled over and said he was going to grab the GPS from the trunk. He got out, opened the trunk, got the GPS, came back, stuck it to the windshield with that little suction cup mount, and then we kept driving. And then, maybe a minute later, something in me just snapped awake. I remember looking at him and saying, "Why did you stop there?" He looked completely confused and asked, "What do you mean?" And I said, "The man." From my point of view, when we pulled over, there was someone standing about 10 feet in front of the car, right near the edge of the road. On one side of us was a cornfield. On the other side was dense woods. The headlights lit him up clearly. He was standing still, facing toward the trees. I remember him wearing a baseball cap, and I'm pretty sure he had a backpack on. He didn't move once. Not when we pulled over. Not when my dad got out. Not when my dad opened the trunk. Not when he came back and set up the GPS. He just stood there. And I just sat there, staring at him. That's the part that bothers me the most, honestly. Not just that I saw him, but how I reacted. Because that was not me. I'm anxious. I scare easily. If I saw a random man standing by the woods in the middle of the night, I would have immediately told my dad. I would not have let him get out of the car. I would have locked the doors, panicked, asked what we should do, maybe wondered if we needed to call someone. But I didn't do any of that. I sat there, silently, staring at this man like I had no alarm bells in my body at all. When I finally told my dad what I had seen, he said he hadn't seen anyone. Nothing. No man, no backpack, no figure at the edge of the road. And that made everything feel even stranger. I still ask him about it sometimes, just to make sure he remembers the conversation afterward. He does. He remembers me suddenly reacting once we were already driving again. He remembers me being shaken. But he never saw the man. We didn't turn around. I don't know why. Maybe we were too creeped out. Maybe we just wanted to get home. But normally, I would have wanted to go back and check. I would have wanted to know if he was still there. That was probably 8 or 10 years ago now, and I still think about it. It wasn't just the man by the road. It was the feeling that, for those couple of minutes, I wasn't reacting like myself at all. Like some part of me had been put on pause. My dad had a strange experience of his own when he was younger, back in that same family house, where something frightening happened and he also didn't react the way he normally would have. So I don't know what to call it, but I know what I saw. And whatever it was, it still unsettles me. I've got a lot of strange stories I could tell, but this one still sits with me in a way I don't think I'll ever fully shake. This happened a few years back, late at night, after my kids had finally fallen asleep. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get when everyone else is dreaming and you're the only one still awake. I was sitting at my desk, messaging a friend who lived overseas. We were going back and forth like normal, just chatting, when suddenly, something in the room changed. I don't know how else to explain it. It felt like the darkness had leaned in closer. The air went still. Not peaceful still, but wrong still. It was like every normal little house sound had disappeared at once, and something heavy had taken its place. I started typing to my friend, trying to explain how uneasy I felt. Before I could really make sense of it, he messaged me back and said, "Read what you just sent." So I looked, and my stomach dropped. The message I meant to send was something like, "I feel like the atmosphere in my house just changed. I can't explain it, but I don't think I'm alone." But that wasn't all it said. Right in the middle of my sentence were words I know I did not type. It said, "Mara is here. Deal with it. I'm not your friend. Ha ha ha." The second I read it, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. My arms broke out in goosebumps, and then I felt something brush across my shoulder. Not a breeze, not a loose strand of hair. Something touching me. The room had gone freezing cold, but there was this strange electric feeling in the air too, like the whole space was charged. I turned around in my chair, and behind me was the figure of a young woman. She was tall, but not in a normal way. Her body looked stretched out and uneven, with long arms raised toward the ceiling. Her face was almost completely shadowed, even though she was staring right at me. I wanted to scream. Every part of me wanted to. But my daughters were asleep nearby, and all I could think was, what if they wake up? What if they see this? So I forced myself to stay as calm as I could. My voice was shaking, but I told her she had to leave my home. I told her she was not welcome there. I told her I was not afraid enough to let her stay. The room seemed to get darker after that. The air felt thick, almost hard to breathe through. I started reciting the prayer for protection, quietly at first, then stronger. I walked toward the front door, still praying, still picturing my daughters and myself surrounded by light, love, and protection. When I opened the door, I said her name once and told her she had to leave. I kept repeating the prayer and imagined pushing every bit of that dark presence out of my house. I don't know how long it took. It probably wasn't long at all, but in the moment it felt stretched and strange, like time had gone soft around the edges. Then I closed the door, locked it, and stood there trying to breathe. The next morning, both of my daughters told me they'd had the same kind of dream. They said a very tall teenage girl had been trying to wake them up. Then my older daughter looked straight at me and asked, "Mom, who's Mara? And why was she so angry with you?" I felt the blood drain out of my face. I told her not to say that name again. Not because I wanted to scare her, but because I didn't want that thing to feel invited back into our home. For about a week after that, I could still feel that dark energy around the property. Sometimes in the front yard, sometimes near the back. But every time I said the prayer for protection, it would pull back. Eventually, it faded completely. I still don't know what Mara was. I don't know why she came into my house, or why she chose that night to make herself known. But I do know this. Nothing has ever frightened me the way she did. I've lived in a couple of houses that felt haunted, but there was one place where things went far beyond just a strange feeling. That was the house where I actually saw something. After we moved in, I kept getting this sensation that a girl was watching me. It was hard to explain, but it always seemed to come from the same side of the house, almost like there was a spot where the air had memory in it. Then the dreams started. In the dreams, there was a young boy, maybe 13 or 14. He looked like he belonged in the 1980s, with the clothes and the hair, all of it. He never really spoke much. He would just show me things. A headstone, bushland, a car, and then he would point in one direction. The only word he ever said was, "Mum." The dreams happened so often that I finally asked an older neighbor whether there had ever been a crash on the highway near our place. I thought maybe that was what he was trying to show me. She told me no, not near the house. Then one night, my ex dropped me home after studying. It was around 2 in the morning. From outside, it looked like every light in the house was on. But the second I opened the front door, the whole place was pitch black. That really shook me. After that, I made my boyfriend walk me right to the door every time he dropped me off. I asked my family the next day if they had left the lights on, and they all said no. They had turned everything off before bed. Another time, a small ornament in my bedroom suddenly flew across the room and hit the wall. It didn't break, which somehow made it feel even stranger, like whatever threw it knew exactly how much force to use. But the worst thing happened early one morning. It was around 4, light enough to make out shapes but still dim. I woke up because someone was walking around my room. They were moving slowly, looking around in this curious, snooping way, almost like they were searching for something. At first, I only saw the figure from behind. It looked thin and male, so in my half-asleep state, I thought it was my brother. I sat up, annoyed, and said, "What are you looking for?" The figure reacted immediately. It turned its head toward me, and that was when I saw it had no face. It wasn't my brother. It walked out of my room, but then it did something I'll never forget. It leaned its blank, faceless head back around the edge of my doorway, like it was taking one last look at me. Then it walked away toward the lounge room, which was the opposite direction from all the bedrooms. I didn't even trust what I had just seen, so I got up and checked every bedroom. Everyone was asleep. No one had been in my room. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a human shape made from gray smoke, except the edges weren't wispy or messy. They were smooth. And when it bent its neck to look at me, it moved at an angle no human neck should be able to move. Years after we moved out, I was dating someone new named Kalen. I had never told him anything about that house. One day, he mentioned that he had gone to look at a room in a share house, but he couldn't take it because the feeling inside was too awful. He said the place felt wrong the second he stepped in. I asked him where it was. It was the exact same house. Then, years later, I was going through old newspapers on microfilm, and this is the part that sounds made up, but it isn't. 2 doors down from that house, in the same direction where I always felt watched from, there had been a woman living with 2 young teenagers in the 1980s, a boy and a girl. In one of the newspaper photos, I saw the exact car from my dreams. The story said their mother had some kind of breakdown. It seems she may have drugged the children, put them in the family car, and driven out to bushland in the same direction the boy in my dreams had always pointed. She killed them there, and then herself. And after all those dreams, all those strange things, all that time of him showing me the car and the bushland and saying only one word, I finally understood what he had been trying to tell me. Mom. I used to live in this old house with my ex, Clara. It wasn't ancient or anything, but it definitely had that kind of tired, settled-in feeling, like the walls had been listening for decades. There were boxes and odd little things up in the attic that looked like they went back to the 1950s, maybe even earlier. Nothing dramatic at first glance, just an old house with old bones. But things happened there. Small things at first, then stranger ones. The basement was partly finished, but we mostly used it for storage. I was really the only one who ever went down there. One morning, I got home from work around 5:30, still half asleep and running on fumes, and I noticed the basement light was on. I could see it glowing through the little basement windows from outside. The weird part was, I hadn't been down there in weeks, maybe longer. Later that day, I asked Clara if she'd gone down there for anything, and she said no. She hadn't touched it. Another time, we went to bed like usual. Upstairs, all the bedroom doors were closed, except the bathroom door, which we always left cracked open. When we woke up the next morning, every single door upstairs was wide open. Not just slightly open, wide open, like someone had walked down the hall and pulled each one back. Then there was the basement itself. It was mostly one big open room, except for a small room tucked into one corner. But right in the middle of the open area, there was this big plastic utility sink and, for some reason, a toilet. Just sitting there. No walls around it, no sign there ever had been walls. Just a random basement toilet, standing there like it had been waiting for someone. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but anytime I spent more than a few minutes down there, I would suddenly get the strongest urge to use the bathroom, even if I had just gone before heading down. It happened enough times that I started joking the toilet was cursed, like it was trying to lure me in. Maybe it wanted a sacrifice. Maybe it was after my soul in the least dignified way possible. I don't know. It was absurd, but it was also genuinely weird. One night, Clara woke me up in a panic. I was completely asleep, dead to the world, and she shook me awake asking, "Did you just say my name?" I told her no, obviously. I'd been asleep. She said a man's voice had woken her up. Not just whispering or mumbling either. It had said her full name. First, middle, and last. Clear enough that she knew exactly what she'd heard. The thing that bothered me most, though, happened one night after 1 in the morning. I was downstairs on the couch watching a show. Clara was upstairs asleep. The whole house was quiet. From where I was sitting, I could see part of the staircase leading down from the second floor, but not the very bottom where it opened near the front door. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone coming down the stairs. Long, dark hair, moving quietly. I just assumed it was Clara. But there were no footsteps, no creaking, nothing. And then whoever it was never came fully into view. I waited a second, expecting her to step around the corner. She didn't. So I leaned way over from the couch, trying to see the bottom of the stairs and the front door area. No one was there. The front door was closed. Nothing had opened. Nothing had moved. Whoever or whatever I saw had simply come down the stairs and vanished. Eventually, Clara and I broke up. She moved out, and later I moved into a condo. I figured that was the end of it. New place, newer building, no creepy basement toilet, no old attic full of dusty relics. Clean slate. Then one night, I woke up around 3 in the morning, which almost never happens. I sleep like a rock. I'm the kind of person who can sleep through alarms, storms, and probably a minor parade. But I woke up suddenly, wide awake enough to know something felt wrong. I looked at the clock, confused, then sat up a little. At the foot of my bed, there was a figure crouched down. I stared at it for a long time. Not a quick glance. Not one of those half-second, maybe I imagined it things. I mean, I looked at it for probably 30 seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. And then, honestly, I was so tired that I just thought, nope, not dealing with this. Laid back down and went to sleep. In the morning, with daylight in the room, I checked the foot of the bed to see if there was anything that could have looked like a crouched person in the dark. A chair, a pile of clothes, a shadow, anything. There was nothing. That was the part that got to me later. In the moment, I was too exhausted to care. But once I was awake and thinking clearly, it really unsettled me. So, yeah, The old house had strange doors, lights turning on by themselves, a voice calling Clara by her full name, and something with long, dark hair that disappeared at the bottom of the stairs. And somehow, even after I moved out, something still seemed to know where I was. I only had one experience like this, and it happened last year when I was at university. I rented one of the end units in this old triplex, and I lived there by myself for the whole school year. From the very first night, little things started happening. Nothing huge at first, just strange enough to make me pause. That first night, I took off my wristwatch and set it on top of a magazine on the couch. In the morning, it was gone. I tore the place apart looking for it, but I never found it again. Then there was this spare clock radio I had plugged in near the bathroom sink. It kept switching itself on in the middle of the night, always to static. Just loud, hissing dead air, loud enough to wake me up from down the hallway. The cellar door was another thing. It would unlatch by itself and slowly swing open. The switch for the parking lot security light was down there too, and somehow it kept getting turned off. I'd go down, turn it back on, and later it would be off again. One night, I was reading in bed when something appeared right beside me. It looked like a pale white mist, almost like fog, but it didn't drift in from anywhere. It kind of grew outward from one little point until it was about the size of a short person, maybe a teenager. It stayed there just long enough for me to look at it, maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and then it folded back into itself and vanished. The strange thing is, I wasn't scared. I got up, checked the outlets, unplugged my stereo, and left the light on for the rest of the night. Somehow, I still fell asleep. After that, I started hearing voices downstairs when I was in bed. Sometimes footsteps too, coming up the stairs. I kept telling myself I was half asleep, and maybe I was. It never jolted me fully awake. It was more like I'd surfaced just enough to notice it, then sink back under. Then, just after Christmas, I locked myself out one night. I went over to the neighbor's place while I waited for my friend, Nolan, to come by with my spare keys. The other 2 units were both rented by women in their 30s. One of them had a kid, I think. We'd barely spoken before that night. We had a couple of beers, and after a while, one of them nudged the other and said, "Ask him." So the other one looked at me and said, "Have you ever had anything weird happen in your unit?" I played dumb at first. I didn't want to be the guy who says, "Actually, yes, my rental might be haunted." But then they started telling me their own stories. They talked about noises, things disappearing, laundry going missing from the bed before it could even be put away. One of them said her boyfriend once ran into something in the upstairs hallway in the middle of the night, and after that, he refused to sleep over again. So I finally told them what had been happening to me. That's when they told me my unit had always been the worst one. One neighbor said she'd hear footsteps tearing up and down the stairs in my place during the day while I was away on campus. Not once or twice, all the time. That bothered me more than anything else, because it meant things were happening even when I wasn't there to imagine them. They also told me the tenants before me had lived there for years, close to a decade, but eventually left because the disturbances got too irritating. Apparently, the biggest problem was the kitchen at night. Chairs scraping, things moving around, and sounds like a group of men sitting around playing cards. That made something click for me. When I first called the landlord about the place, he told me it was empty because the long-term tenants had gotten odd. He never explained what that meant. He just said they'd moved into another property he owned across town. At the time, I figured they just wanted to change. After that night, I couldn't really brush everything off anymore. When Nolan arrived with my keys, I told him what the neighbors had said. He got quiet, then admitted he hated going into my place over Christmas break to feed my fish while I was out of town. He said one day he'd stop by and all the lights would be off. The next night, every light would be on. Little things would be moved around too. His wife went with him once and refused to go inside after that. She remembered leaving lights on the night before, and when they came back, the whole place was dark. That shook her badly. I still stayed there for the rest of the school year. One night, I just spoke out loud to whatever was in the house. I said something like, "You can stay here with me, but don't scare me, don't steal my things, and don't mess with me." And honestly, it seemed to help. From January to May, not much happened. Doors still opened sometimes. The hallway closet light would switch on by itself. Once, while I was printing an essay late at night, I swear someone came up behind me and leaned over my shoulder. I jumped, then laughed and said, "Please don't do that." It never happened again. Still, I changed the way I lived. I started staying up until dawn before going to sleep. I spent as much time away from the place as I could. I stayed at my girlfriend's apartment out of town whenever possible. I didn't tell most of my friends about it until the very end of the school year. We had an all-night hockey party, and I'd had enough to drink that I finally brought it up. I thought they'd all laugh or think I was losing it, but they didn't. Instead, a few of them started telling their own stories. Weird things they'd seen or heard and never really talked about. That's what stayed with me, honestly. I think this kind of thing happens more often than people admit. Most of us just keep it quiet, because saying it out loud makes it feel too real. A couple of years back, we rented this tiny little Airbnb tucked away in the Texas Hill Country. It was one of those cute, peaceful cabins that looks like it belongs on a postcard, and the host mentioned, very casually, that it had been built on what she called energy lines. At the time, we just smiled at that. You know, one of those quirky listing details you don't think too much about. The place was way out in the country. I mean really out there. No neighbors, no porch lights in the distance, no cars passing by. Just trees, open land, and this huge dark sky pressing in from every direction. Honestly, it was exactly what we thought we wanted. Quiet. Remote. A place to unplug and breathe for a few days. Inside, there was one bedroom and a loft. The bedroom had bunk beds and a full-size bed, so we gave that to our boys. My husband and I took the loft since it had the bigger bed. The first night was completely fine. A little strange, maybe, just because the darkness was so deep and the silence was almost too quiet. It's one thing to read "secluded" in a listing. It's another thing entirely to stand there at night and realize there is nothing around you but black windows and your own thoughts. But still, nothing happened. We slept well and woke up to one of those soft, golden mornings that makes everything feel harmless again. The second night was different. I woke up from a nightmare that felt far too real. In the dream, this shriveled old man with glowing red eyes was crawling across the loft floor toward me. He climbed up onto the bed and slipped under the covers, and then I felt his hand around my ankle. It was dry and hot and twisted, and he started grabbing at my leg, moving higher, like he was trying to pull himself closer. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Then I woke up. Only I couldn't move. At that exact moment, my husband, Daniel, shouted my name. His voice was full of panic. He started slapping at the bed and yelling, "No, no!" That snapped me out of it. I gasped and sat straight up, pulling my legs to my chest while he tore the blankets back and reached for the lamp. There was nothing there. No old man, no shadow. Nothing under the covers. Nothing beside the bed. But both of us were terrified. Daniel told me he had been dreaming that something dark, Something he described as almost demon-like was trying to drag me off the bed and down onto the floor, like it wanted to pull me underneath, and I had been dreaming about that horrible old man crawling toward me. Neither one of us wanted to stay in that loft after that. We went downstairs to check on the boys. They woke up a little when we opened the bedroom door, but they were fine, sleepy, confused, completely safe. So we stayed downstairs. There was a small daybed in the living area, and we curled up there together, wide awake now, suddenly very aware that none of the windows or doors had curtains. During the day, that had seemed charming, open, airy. At night, it felt like the whole world could look in. And I know how this sounds, but we both had the strongest feeling that we were being watched. Then something moved outside. Just a shape in the dark at first, coming closer to the back door. We froze. I remember holding Daniel's hand so tightly my fingers hurt. And then it stepped into the porch light. A cat. Just a cat. One of the feral cats the host had told us about. She said they roamed the property and were friendly, but they weren't allowed inside the cabin. We had seen a few earlier that day, and this was one of the bigger tabbies. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like she knew we needed her. So we opened the door and stepped out onto the wraparound porch. The air was warm and still, with heat lightning flickering way off in the distance. That cat came right up to us and let us pet her, purring like a little engine. And somehow, that changed everything. The fear started to loosen. The night didn't feel so hostile anymore. It was still dark, still quiet, but not empty in the same way. After a while, we got sleepy again. We went back inside, and believe it or not, we went back up to the loft. And we slept just fine. But for a few minutes there, in that tiny cabin in the middle of nowhere, I have never felt so certain that something had come very close to us. Years ago, I worked for a care agency that had a little staff flat for whoever was covering the overnight shift. The setup was simple enough. The main office was at the front of the building, and from there, a long, narrow hallway led down to the bedroom, then the bathroom, and finally the kitchen at the very back. There was CCTV in the office that showed the rear yard. It covered the back door into the kitchen and the kitchen window too. But there was no security light outside, nothing like that. Just the camera watching the dark. And I'll be honest with you, from almost the first time I worked there, I hated that kitchen. I do not mean I disliked it in some ordinary way. I mean there was something about that room that made my whole body react before my brain could explain why. It always felt as though someone was standing in one particular corner, watching me. Not just watching either. It felt hostile, heavy, wrong. Whenever I went in there, my heart would start hammering and my hands would get sweaty. I'd feel this awful dread blooming in my chest, like my instincts were screaming at me to get out. Eventually, I stopped going into the kitchen after dark altogether. When I arrived for a night shift, I would do everything while it was still light. I'd check the switches, make sure things were off, then bring the kettle, mugs, and anything else I might need through to the office. I basically made a little survival camp at the desk so I would not have to go back there. One night, I had done exactly that. I was sitting in the office, trying to settle in, when I suddenly felt it. That presence. Only this time, it did not feel like it was in the kitchen. It felt like it was standing right outside the office door. I cannot explain how I knew. I just did. It was that unmistakable feeling of being watched from the doorway, so strong that I could barely breathe properly. After a while, I got so uncomfortable that I kicked the door shut with my foot, then moved my chair to the other side of the room so I could sit facing it. That also put me right beside the CCTV monitor. I glanced over at the screen, and my stomach just dropped. The kitchen light was on. Not a reflection, not a blur. Outside on the camera, everything was pitch black except for that kitchen window glowing brightly in the middle of the screen. I sat there, staring at it, frozen, hoping it would switch off by itself. I kept telling myself there had to be a normal explanation, but the only normal explanation was that someone was in the building. Eventually, I knew I had to check. I was almost crying by then. I opened the office door just enough to look down the hallway toward the kitchen, and the light was off. Completely off. I looked back at the CCTV monitor, and now the screen showed it off too. Just darkness at the back of the building. I remember feeling this horrible confusion, because somehow that was even worse than if I had found a person there. I checked the CCTV recording after that. I played it back, stopped it, rewound it, watched it again and again, trying to convince myself it had been showing an earlier moment, or that I had misunderstood what I saw. But it clearly showed the kitchen light coming on at a time when it absolutely should not have been on, then going off again. I did not go to bed that night. I stayed on the sofa in the office until morning because I was too frightened to walk down the hallway to the bedroom. When the day staff arrived, I checked the back door with them. It was locked properly. Nothing was open. Nothing looked disturbed. And I had the only set of keys, so there was no reasonable way anyone else could have come in. A few days later, another staff member, Leah, finished a night shift and asked me quietly, "Have you ever felt like this place is strange at night?" I did not tell her anything at first. I just asked her what she meant. And then she described the same feeling. The same horrible presence. The same spot in the kitchen. That made my skin go cold, because it meant I had not imagined it. Not long after that, I was on nights again. This time I was in the bedroom, which was on the ground floor and looked out toward the backyard and the kitchen. I had just turned off the bedroom light when I noticed a glow outside. I went to the blinds and looked through them. I could see straight into the kitchen. The light was on again. I stood there for ages, trying to gather enough courage to move. Then I opened the bedroom door and looked down the hall. The kitchen was dark. I went back into the bedroom, looked out again, and the glow was gone. Leah had a few odd experiences there too, though I cannot remember all the details now. What I do remember is that after those nights, neither of us ever really slept when we were on shift in that building. I have never experienced anything like it since, and after all these years, I still cannot explain what was happening in that kitchen. I've had a handful of strange experiences over the years, but most of them happened in one particular building I used to clean. And one night there changed me. I worked for a cleaning company, and we handled the housekeeping for a performing arts group. One of their venues was this old Orpheum-style theater. Beautiful place, but from my very first shift, something about it felt off. At first, it was small things, stuff falling from shelves, distant screams when no one was around, heavy footsteps from somewhere above me. And that's the thing. These old theaters are built solid. Granite, marble, concrete floors. You could have a couple hundred people moving around upstairs and hear voices, maybe a little shuffling, but you don't hear clear, heavy footsteps. So the first time I heard those slow, thudding steps above me, it stopped me cold. The first night, I wasn't alone when a roll of paper towels jumped off a shelf. A couple of my coworkers saw me notice it. I didn't say anything, and then a second roll flew off even harder, like whatever was there didn't appreciate being ignored. My coworkers just looked at me and said, "Yeah, this place is haunted. You'll get used to it." I learned pretty quickly that whatever was in that building did not like being dismissed. There were a lot of incidents after that, But the one that really changed things was the night I got chased out. We had been finishing up another building, and after that we needed to go over to the theater to make sure it was ready for a show the next day. I got impatient waiting on everyone else, so I told the crew I'd head over first and get started. I came in through a side entrance. Rehearsal was already over. The actors were gone. Security was gone. The staff had left. As far as I knew, I was the only person in the building. I started my walkthrough on the lowest level, checking the back of house areas first. That was the part of the theater most people hated. It always felt heavy back there, like the air was watching you breathe. But that night, strangely enough, it felt calm. No footsteps, no voices, no feeling of being watched. Nothing. So I moved toward the front of the theater. I checked the auditorium. Everything was fine. I checked the lobby. Still fine. Then I checked the men's restroom and the women's restroom. I was almost done. But the second I stepped out of the women's restroom, the whole atmosphere shifted. It was like something dark poured into the lobby all at once. I heard a voice near the entrance to the auditorium, but I couldn't make out what it said. I stopped and listened. Then I heard the trash bag and the can by that entrance being moved around. I called out, "Hello? Is someone in there?" Right then, one of the stall doors in the women's restroom behind me started slamming. I turned and looked back at the restroom doorway, which was only a few feet away. Then I heard the trash bag move again, this time closer. I looked toward it, and the bag and the trash can right near me shifted on its own. That's when the big guy got me. That's what everyone called him. We believed he was the thing behind the heavy footsteps, the deep screams, and that awful presence people felt in the building. Later that week, I even caught what looked like a huge figure a few times on an SLS camera app. But that night, I didn't see him. I felt him. I didn't get grabbed. Nothing touched me. But every sense I had, except my eyesight, suddenly screamed that something huge, fast and furious had rushed up behind me and stopped about an inch from the back of my neck. It was the strangest, most terrifying feeling I've ever had. Every part of me said, "Get out." And I did. I moved through that lobby, into the atrium, and out the front doors at a speed that wasn't exactly running, but it definitely wasn't walking either. That feeling stayed right on the back of my neck until I got through the atrium doors. I went back to the other building, and my girlfriend, who worked with me, saw my face immediately. She asked, "What happened?" All I could do was hand her badge back to her and say, "I will never step foot in that building alone again. It's ready for tomorrow. I'll be in the car when you're done." Then I walked away. That night changed me because, up until then, I had always handled paranormal things by ignoring them. I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't invite it, didn't talk to it, didn't entertain it. I was closed off to it on purpose. Honestly, I had probably told completely normal household noises they weren't welcome more than once. A water heater would kick on, and there I'd be, telling the empty air to get away from me. But after that night, I wasn't just scared. I was angry. Because whatever that thing was, it had gotten to me. It had put real fear in me. Not the kind you can talk yourself out of either. My body was leaving that building, whether my brain agreed or not. So after that, I started researching. I began doing rough, amateur investigations in the theater. Nothing fancy, just me trying to understand what was there. It felt like being a boxer who lost the title and wanted a rematch. And I got some interesting responses. That's when I started calling the big guy the coward, because whenever more than one person was around, he kept his distance. He would linger at the edges, but he wouldn't come close like he did when I was alone. And he really didn't seem to like it when I caught him on the SLS app. Out of everything that happened in that theater, that night was the most undeniable. That was the night I stopped ignoring it. I was around 18 at the time, and I'd already had enough strange experiences that I didn't really question whether something was out there. I was deep into ghost hunting back then, and honestly, I had started getting way too attached to the Ouija board. Looking back, it wasn't healthy. It had become this doorway I kept standing too close to. My friend, though, he didn't believe in any of it. He was the kind of person who needed proof right in front of him before he would even consider something. Then one rainy afternoon in the middle of summer, he finally agreed to try the board with me. It was his first time. We went to his old childhood house. His family had recently moved out, but the place hadn't sold yet, so it was just sitting there empty. We ended up setting everything up in what used to be his younger sister's bedroom. We had the board on the floor, 2 candles lit, no lights on. There was only this gray, stormy daylight coming through the window. The bedroom door was mostly closed, but not all the way, because the carpet kept it from catching properly in the frame. We started the session, and at first it gave us a few simple answers. Nothing too dramatic. Then I decided to ask it something personal, something my friend wouldn't know. I said, "What is my dad's middle name?" My dad passed away when I was a baby, and my friend didn't know his first name, let alone his middle name. The planchette started moving, slow and deliberate. Lloyd. Lloyd. That was right. The second I told my friend it was correct, the whole feeling in the room changed. It wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It felt like we had knocked on a door, and something had answered from much closer than we expected. Then a few things happened almost at the same time. The planchette drifted all the way across the board, went over the edge, and slid onto the carpet right beside my phone. As soon as it stopped there, my phone started ringing. I don't even remember who was calling. I just remember the sound of it cutting through that room. At the same moment, both candles flickered so low they almost went out. Neither of us said anything. We just panicked. We both jumped up and ran for the door without closing the session. I got there first, and right before I could grab it, that door slammed, fully shut into the frame, right in front of my face. The same door that had been stuck slightly open because of the carpet. That was it. We were done. We tore out of that room, out of that house, straight into my car, and left. I don't really remember what we did after that. I think my brain just filed the rest of the day away somewhere quiet. But later, when I went home, something else happened. I was standing on my front porch, unlocking the door to my own house, which already had a long history of being terrifying in its own way. And right as I was opening the door, I heard someone yell my name directly into my ear. It sounded like they were standing right beside me. Not across the porch, not behind me in the yard. Right there, close enough to feel. I rushed inside, but honestly, that didn't feel much safer. That house had never felt safe to me. I have so many stories from that place. Now that I'm older, I understand that spending 13 years of my childhood in a house where I always felt watched, always felt afraid, actually did something to me. I never really felt secure there. I was always bracing for something. And there were worse things than that Ouija board session. The haunting in my childhood home eventually built up to the day I came face to face with a shadow figure. And that was one of the most deeply frightening moments of my life. But talking about that house is heavy. There's a lot buried there. For some reason, though, that rainy afternoon with the board still stays with me. The empty house, the candles, the name, the phone ringing, and that door slamming shut. It felt like something followed the sound of my question home. I used to be exactly where you are. I believed in the paranormal from the time I was young. Ghosts, monsters, demons, hidden realms, strange little cracks in the world where something else might be looking back. I read everything I could get my hands on. I went to supposedly haunted places. I listened to friends and relatives tell their stories, and honestly, after a while, I started to feel left out. I wanted something of my own. Then, without any warning, I got it. I've had 2 encounters in my life that I cannot explain away. Not stories somebody told me, not rumors. I was there. I was part of it. And if I could go back and talk to the version of me who was so hungry for proof, I'd tell myself 2 things. First, be careful what you ask for. I know that sounds worn out, but I mean it. The energy you send out, that wanting, that invitation, you don't really know what might hear it. Second, I learned very quickly that I do not understand those other places, not even a little. Whatever exists beside us, beneath us, around us, there are things out there you do not want to meet, things you'll wish you could unknow. So be patient, be respectful. I don't think it's a matter of if something answers you. I think it's a matter of when. But I would not recommend chasing it. Let it come on its own terms. Now I'll tell you about one of my encounters. This happened a few years ago, when COVID was finally starting to loosen its grip on everything. I was living in Dallas at the time, and because of a sudden mess of circumstances, I had to move almost immediately. I didn't have much money, didn't have much of a plan, and life had basically grabbed me by the collar and dragged me back toward Oklahoma. I arranged to stay with one of my aunts when I got there. She was living with her boyfriend way out in the country. And when I say way out, I mean the kind of country where the dark feels older than the roads. You had to pull water from a well. Cell service only worked if you stood in one specific spot near one specific window. And even then, you had to hold your mouth right. What I didn't know was that my aunt and her boyfriend were in the middle of a serious fight. So when I pulled in, she was on her way out. And she stayed gone. 4 days, 3 nights. Before I go further, I need to explain something. Over the years, people in my family had talked about something out there. Young relatives, older ones, people I trusted, people I wasn't so sure about. They all had different names for it, but the stories carried the same shape. Something big lived in those woods. Nobody had really seen it clearly, but people knew it was there. They said if you walked around outside at night, it would follow you. Not quietly enough to be mistaken for nothing either. It wanted you to know it was there. I always treated those stories like a family-made urban legend. Creepy, sure, but not something I let settle too deep in my mind. That first night, I was alone in my aunt's place, which was basically an old school bus converted into a camper. It was just me and my cat, Otis. I was playing The Last of Us Part 2 with my headphones on, trying to distract myself from the weirdness of being stranded out there. After a while, I noticed Otis acting strange. He was usually calm, very low-key, but now he was staring at something outside the bus, and every bit of fur on him was standing up. I had never seen him look like that. I took off my headphones, and that's when I heard him making this sound. It wasn't a growl exactly, and it wasn't a meow. It was low, shaky, almost warbled. The kind of sound a cat makes before a fight, except deeper. More like a warning. Then he stopped. Just completely stopped. He lowered his head and started tracking something outside. Something moving toward the bus. That was when I noticed the silence. Not normal quiet. Not nighttime country quiet. This was predator silence. Heavy silence. Silence with weight in it. No wind, No insects, no frogs, no dogs barking somewhere in the distance. Nothing. The whole world had gone still. I held my breath and watched my cat's head follow whatever was outside as it reached the bus and began to move around it. Not walk around it. It was like it twisted around it. Otis's head kept turning, slowly, carefully, following it as it moved along the outside of the bus. And I don't know how to explain this, but in that moment, I suddenly knew a few things. I knew it was old, ancient even. I knew it was huge, about the size of a bear, maybe bigger. I knew it was unbelievably quiet, and I knew it was studying the bus, studying me, looking for the fastest way in if it decided it needed one. The way it moved was impossible to picture clearly. The closest I can come is smoke, snake, and big cat all at once. But that still isn't right. It was not any of those things. That's just the only language I have for it. I didn't feel like I was in immediate danger, exactly. But I felt like danger was standing right there with its hand on the door. Like one wrong move from me could change everything. And I had no intention of finding out what that wrong move was. Then, just as quickly as it had come, it started to leave. Otis kept tracking it as it unwound itself from the bus and moved back toward the woods. But before it disappeared, it pressed its body against the front of the bus. The whole thing rocked, hard, back and forth several times. It felt like another vehicle had hit us. Not a crash exactly, but force, power. If I had been standing, I think I would have been thrown into the wall. That was when I understood it had done that on purpose. It was a message. I'm here. I'm watching. Do not test me. And yes, it came back every night I stayed there. The next 2 nights, I waited for it, listened for it. The last night, I was sitting in one of the booth seats with my back against a window, trying to read and keep myself calm. Somehow, it got right up to the bus before I realized it was there. No footsteps, no warning. Just that silence again. Then I felt it press its weight against the window behind me. The metal creaked. The window started to bow inward from the pressure. I swear, I nearly dropped dead right there. I moved to the middle of the bus and stayed there until morning, away from every wall, every window, every edge of that place. The next day, I left. I have never gone back. Let me tell you something about myself first. I was an unusual kid, and honestly, I still am, just with more years on me now. I wasn't diagnosed as autistic until I was an adult, though looking back, it made perfect sense. It runs deep in my family. I've also always remembered things people insist I was too young to remember, but I do remember them, clearly. Not just as pictures either. I remember the smell of a room, the feel of the air, the texture of things, all of it. And as long as I can recall, I could read. Books were my refuge. I loved fairy tales, folklore, anything old and enchanted. But even as a child, I knew perfectly well the difference between fantasy and real life. I never mixed those up. When I was very little, we lived in an old Florida house that sat up on piers, with a wide porch wrapping around it, and a long hallway running straight through the middle. If you walked in the front door, you could see all the way to the back. Rooms lined both sides of the hall, and the place had that kind of old-fashioned shape that feels beautiful and strange at the same time. It was the sort of house that seemed to hold on to its stories. I was about 3 when we moved in, and it did not take long for me to feel that we weren't alone there. There were, at least to my mind, 2 very different kinds of spirits in that house. One terrified me. My bedroom was halfway down the left side of the hall, and at night, I would see a man step out through the fireplace, leading a horse. It never felt like he was entering the room so much as continuing along a path the house happened to be built across. He never looked at me. The horse never did either. They never spoke, never paused, never acknowledged me at all. But every single time, I felt this awful heaviness coming off him, something cold and hateful, and I would scream until they passed through. I can't explain why I knew he was bad. I just did. After a few nights of this, my parents stopped making me sleep in that room. The others were different. They were children. A little girl, about 5 years old, and a younger boy, maybe 2 or 3. The girl's name was Elsie. She was bossy in the way some little girls can be, always wanting to organize things and decide how everyone ought to behave. The boy, Jonah, showed up less often, but he was sweet. He liked toy cars, and he loved being read to. Elsie liked to fuss over my little brother, and if I refused to play what she wanted, she'd get offended and pout. My brother used to ride his tricycle down the hallway, then get stuck because he couldn't turn it around by himself. More than once, it seemed like Elsie helped him. The strange thing is, they didn't look ghostly at all. They looked solid, ordinary, like children you might expect to see in any house. They could just vanish in an instant. Nobody really believed me when I talked about Elsie. My mother especially brushed it off. She thought she was imaginary, and because people sometimes tried to call me by a nickname that sounded a bit like her name, my mother decided I must have invented Elsie out of that. That bothered me so much. I knew what I was seeing, and being teased about it made me furious. At one point, my father built a big bird enclosure at the end of the playroom and filled it with parakeets. I liked watching them, though from a distance. One day I was sitting there drawing, completely focused, and Elsie wanted me to stop and play something else, probably dolls. I hated dolls, which never stopped relatives from giving them to me. I told her she had to wait until I finished. The next thing I knew, the birds were loose, flapping wildly all over the room. I didn't see her open the cage, but I was certain she had done it. I crouched down screaming while feathers and wings went everywhere. My parents rushed in. My father tried to gather the birds, and my mother pulled me out of the room and demanded to know why I had opened the cage. I told her I hadn't, that Elsie had. She thought I was lying, and I got punished for it. I was angry at Elsie, hurt by my mother, and completely shaken by the birds. Even now, if one flaps too close to my head, my whole body remembers that moment. Then my baby sister was born in the winter, during a cold spell, and my mother had fires going in the fireplaces to keep the house warm. My brother and baby sister were sleeping in a room on the right side of the hall, and my mother was in the kitchen nearby. My brother, trying in his toddler way to help, decided the baby must be cold and pushed her bassinet closer to the fire. Too close. Eventually, it caught. My mother later said that a little girl ran into the kitchen, shouting that the baby's bed was on fire. She ran in, saw the flames, snatched my sister out, and shoved the burning bassinet outside through the porch door. Then she came looking for me and the girl. I was nowhere near it, just playing at the other end of the house, completely unaware of what had happened. She demanded to know who I had let in. There were neighborhood girls I wasn't allowed to invite over, so that's what she assumed. I told her I hadn't let anyone in. I said it must have been Elsie. My mother searched the house and found no one, which only made her angrier. But then my father came home, and after hearing her describe the little girl, he came and asked me what Elsie looked like. I described her exactly as I always had: blonde ringlets, a pale blue dress with a white collar, little brown lace-up shoes. My mother had described the same child. Even my brother said it was Elsie. Not long after that, we left the house because my parents were separating. I was heartbroken to go. For years afterward, my mother refused to hear anything about what had happened there. She became very religious, and the idea of ghosts didn't fit into the way she wanted the world to work. If anyone mentioned that house, She got angry. She said we were lying. She especially hated that I never backed down. When I was older, I went to live with my father. One day we were driving past that old house, and it had been lifted up, ready to be moved somewhere else. I looked at him and said I wanted to ask him something about the place. He just smiled and said, "About the ghosts?" He told me he'd heard footsteps running down the hallway when no one was there. He told me he had seen the man with the horse too. He even said that one time, when my brother had gotten his tricycle stuck in the hall again, he started to get up and help, but the tricycle turned around by itself. My brother wasn't touching the handlebars and wasn't pedaling. My father said he laughed and thanked whatever had done it. Then he told me the part that has stayed with me ever since. On the day he was moving out for good, he was loading the last of his things into the car when he looked up and saw a little blonde girl standing on the back porch. He looked twice because he couldn't quite believe it, but she was still there. Elsie, exactly as I had always described her. And she said to him, very simply, "Please don't go." My father told her he didn't really have a choice, but he was sad about it too. Then he shut the car door, looked back, and she was gone. I can't tell you what it meant to hear that from him. After years of being told I was making it up, being mocked, being punished, having one person believe me felt like someone opening a window in a locked room. My father even told me my mother had threatened him before, saying she'd keep me from seeing him if she thought he was encouraging those beliefs. So when I hear other people talk about the strange things they experienced as children, and how the adults around them laughed or dismissed them, it still hits a nerve in me. Because whether a child is sensing something supernatural, something psychological, or simply something they don't yet have words for, their fear is still real. Their unease is real. What they need in that moment is not ridicule. They need comfort. They need to be listened to. They need love. That's the part I still carry with me most of all. Hey, I want to tell you something that happened when I was around 12. Back then, it was just my mom, my sister, and me, living in a cramped basement apartment. We didn't have much. I was getting picked on a lot at school, and honestly, real life felt heavy all the time. So I escaped into cartoons, stories, and creepy internet legends. That was around the time the nights started changing. I'd be lying in bed, and out of nowhere, this fear would wash over me. Not the normal kind either. It felt specific, like I wasn't alone, like there were people in my room. I never saw them come in, and I never actually saw their faces, but I could feel exactly where they were standing. There were 3 of them, and somehow I just knew they were adult men. One stayed near the bedroom door, one lingered by the end of my bed, and one stood by the closet. They never rushed me, never spoke to me directly. They just stood there, watching. And the strangest part was, I had this deep, awful feeling that they knew I was awake. I used to keep my face turned toward the wall because I was terrified that if I actually looked at them, something terrible would happen. As long as I didn't turn and face them, I felt like I might be safe. Sometimes I'd hear little noises too, like boots shifting on the floor, a throat being cleared, a sniffle, a quiet cough, just enough to make my skin go cold. I kept telling myself it had to be my imagination. I was a kid. Kids get scared. Kids make things up. So I started sleeping with a nightlight, and that helped because if the room stayed lit, I could fall asleep before that feeling showed up. But my mom would sometimes check on me after I drifted off and switch the light off to save the bulb. So some mornings I'd wake up and find it dark again. After a while, I got tired of being scared. I wanted proof one way or the other. So I started recording audio on my phone at night and leaving it beside my bed. I think part of me wanted to prove I was imagining everything, but I wasn't. I caught the sounds, heavy footsteps, shuffling, sniffling, somebody clearing his throat. Once or twice, a cough that absolutely did not sound like it came from a child. And I need you to understand what that felt like. I was a little girl, already afraid, and then suddenly I had evidence. Real evidence. It wasn't every night, but it happened often enough that I knew it wasn't just one weird coincidence. I played the recordings for a couple of friends, and they heard it too. For one tiny second, I felt relieved, because I thought, thank God, I'm not losing my mind. And then right after that came the worst realization. If I'm not imagining it, then what is in that room with me? Nothing about it made sense. We lived in a basement unit with multiple locked doors between the outside and my bedroom. Even if somebody somehow got in, how were they silent enough on the way in that the recording never picked it up, but loud enough in my room for the phone to catch their boots on the floor? And why would anyone do that? Why sneak in just to stand over a sleeping preteen and then leave without touching anything? At that age, with way too much internet access and not nearly enough common sense, I came up with the most 12-year-old explanation possible. I convinced myself some creepy supernatural thing had chosen me and sent people to watch me. I know how ridiculous that sounds now, but when you're that young, scared, isolated, and already filling your head with horror stories, your mind builds its own logic. And I told no one. Not because I thought it was normal, but because I was scared that if I said it out loud, whatever was in that room would get angry. In my head, staying quiet felt safer. I know what some people would say. Maybe I was making noises in my sleep. Maybe I was dreaming. But I wasn't pacing around in boots at 2 a.m, and I definitely wasn't producing the sound of a grown man coughing. I was a kid. There's one part I still can't stop thinking about. One night my mom came in to turn off the nightlight, and I actually woke up while she was there. We talked for a minute or two. I even asked her about it the next morning, and she confirmed it had happened, so I know I didn't dream that conversation. That whole night was being recorded, same as always. The recording started with me setting the phone down before bed, and in the morning it ended with my mom waking me up. But when I checked it later, the file was only about 4 hours long, even though I'd slept closer to 9. The beginning was there. The ending was there. But a huge chunk from the middle was just gone. The conversation with my mom? Missing. That whole section of the night had vanished. It only happened once, but it rattled me badly. It made me feel like something had happened during those missing hours, and for whatever reason, I wasn't supposed to hear it back. I got older, a little braver, and I quit using the nightlight. I even stopped recording myself. Then about a year later, after we moved into another basement apartment, it happened again. By then my sister had moved out, and it was just my mom and me. The new place was even smaller, and my bedroom was tiny, barely big enough for a twin bed and one dresser. One night, I was lying there, half asleep, facing the wall, when I got that same awful feeling. That same certainty that someone was standing in my room, watching me breathe. This time, it felt like maybe there was only one. So I started recording again. A few more nights, a few more strange sounds, and then, just like before, it stopped. Completely. I've never had a solid explanation for any of it. I've gone over every rational possibility I can think of. Childhood fear, sleep confusion, sounds from pipes or walls, someone outside, somebody breaking in. None of it fits cleanly, especially not with the recordings and the missing time. So no, I can't tell you what it was. I can only tell you what it felt like. It felt real. It felt close. And even now, after all these years, part of me still wants someone to hand me an ordinary explanation and make the whole thing boring. I'd gladly take boring. I'd love boring. But I've never found it. Hey, I'm 18 and I still live with my parents. Not too long ago, my mom decided we should move because she never felt comfortable in our old neighborhood. The new house was bigger, and I was actually excited because I'd finally have a larger room with its own bathroom. The only catch was that the bathroom inside my room didn't work yet, so nobody really used it. Before we even brought all our things in, my parents had a priest come bless the house with holy water. That already left me feeling a little uneasy. Like, maybe there was some reason they felt it was necessary. I tried not to think too much about it, though. The first few nights there felt off. I kept hearing strange noises upstairs, like doors shifting, things dropping, little sounds that didn't make sense when everyone was supposed to be asleep. I told myself it was just a new house making new house noises, but deep down, it didn't feel that simple. One night, while I was asleep in my room, I suddenly became aware of this intense heat spreading across my back. I was lying with my back turned toward that unused bathroom. Then I felt something even worse, someone breathing near my ear. And after that, I heard a woman's voice whispering so clearly it didn't feel like a dream at all. She said she wouldn't close my bathroom door. The terrifying part was that I couldn't move. I was stuck there, fully aware, trying to calm myself down enough to wake up. When I finally managed to break out of it, I shot out of bed shaking, drenched in sweat, and ran straight out of my room. I tried to convince myself it had just been a nightmare, but it felt way too specific, way too real. When I told my parents, they brushed it off and said I was overreacting. After that, I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was standing beside me. For several nights, I kept waking up just to make sure I was alone. Then the nightmares started. They were always about my room. In one, the lights went out all at once, and I had to run out in the dark. I'd never had dreams like that before, and honestly, they got under my skin. Then for about a week, everything went quiet. No nightmares, no whispers, nothing. I started to relax again. But on the 7th night, it happened again. This time, in the dream, I felt that same burning heat, only stronger. It spread all the way from my shoulders down to my heels. Then another voice came, older this time, like an adult man. He sounded angry. I can't remember every word, but I remember the feeling of what he was saying. He was asking why I hadn't listened to what the woman had told me before. At that point, I was on the verge of tears. Some friends had told me that if anything like that happened again, I should pray in my head. So I tried. But the more I prayed, the worse it felt. Then I heard laughter behind me. Not loud, not dramatic, just this awful laugh that made me feel completely helpless. I was so scared, I thought I might actually break down. Then my sister woke me up for breakfast, and I came back to myself all at once. When I told my parents that morning, they looked more serious than before, even though they still said it was probably just another bad dream. My mom decided she'd sleep in my room for a while, just to see if anything strange happened. She brought in an air mattress and stayed there for about a week. That helped me settle down a little. I started to feel safer. But one afternoon, while my mom was out buying groceries, I took a nap in that room, and it happened again. Same heat, same fear, same feeling of someone right behind me. Only this time, I wasn't facing the bathroom. I had my back against the wall. That's what really shook me. The voice came back, older and harsher than before, saying things I couldn't fully understand. But there was one part I did understand, and it scared me even more because it felt personal, like it was talking about me directly. By then, I'd learned the only way to force myself awake was to start moving my fingers, little by little, until I could move my hand, then my arm, then finally pull myself out of it completely. And now, honestly, this is starting to wear me down. I never thought I'd become afraid of falling asleep, but that's exactly what's happening. It's happening more often, and it's starting to affect my whole day. I'm exhausted all the time. I can't rest properly. The people I've told don't really know how to help, and I'm reaching the point where I just want a real explanation. Anything that makes sense, because right now I feel completely drained. I want to tell you about something that happened to me, and even now, I still do not fully know what to make of it. About a year before this happened, my father passed away very suddenly from a heart attack. He was not just my dad, he was my closest friend. Losing him changed something deep in me, and there is not a day that goes by that I do not miss him. As the months passed, I learned how to keep going. Not because the grief got smaller, but because I had no choice except to live around it. You start adjusting to the absence, even when your heart still reaches for the person who is gone. After he died, I dreamed about him a few times. In one of those dreams, I remember looking at him and asking, "What are you doing here? You are gone." But he did not say a word. He just stood there, smiling at me so softly, with this calm, loving look in his eyes. When I woke up, I tried not to hold on to it too tightly. I told myself it was probably just grief, or my mind trying to make sense of everything. I wanted to keep moving forward, even though I still missed him terribly. Then, in December of 2022, something happened that I still carry with me. I had gone to my best friend's birthday party. She lives about 40 minutes away from me, and since I knew I would be driving home that night, I did not drink. Everything about the evening felt ordinary. When it got late, I hugged everyone goodbye, got into my car, and started the drive home. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The roads were quiet, almost empty, the kind of stillness you only get late at night. I was driving like I normally would, music playing softly, just focused on getting home. Then, without any warning, a freezing chill went through my whole body. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I was hit with this immediate urge to lock the doors. So I did. I locked the car, turned my music way down, put everything else aside, and gripped the steering wheel with both hands. And all at once, I had this overwhelming feeling that someone was in the car with me. It was so strong that I started checking the back seat, glancing from side to side, looking at every empty seat, as if I expected to catch movement out of the corner of my eye. But there was nothing there. Still, the feeling would not leave. It was not just nervousness. It felt like a presence, solid, unshakable, as if someone was sitting there with me in silence. I even had the wild thought of pulling over to check the trunk or to look under the car, just because the feeling was that intense. I know how strange that sounds, but in that moment, it felt completely real, like I was not alone. And then, the second I turned into my driveway, it vanished. Just like that. No chill, no heaviness, no presence. Nothing. I sat there for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. And deep down, the thought that came to me was simple. I felt like my dad had been with me, like he had ridden home beside me to make sure I got back safely. I have had experiences in my life that I cannot fully explain, especially after a hospital stay years ago when I flatlined for a few seconds during a seizure. Since then, there have been moments that made me wonder whether there is more around us than we can see. But this felt different from anything else. This felt personal. And even now, when I think back on that night, part of me still believes it was him, quietly keeping watch. Not to frighten me, but to stay close until I made it home. Before I tell you what happened in that old house, you should probably know a little about me. I was an unusual kid. Honestly, I still am, just with more years on me now. I found out as an adult that I'm autistic, which made a lot of things click into place. It runs deep in my family, so it wasn't exactly a thunderbolt. I've also always remembered things from very early childhood that other people insist I couldn't possibly remember. But I do. I remember them clearly. And when I remember, it isn't just pictures. It's the smell of the air, the feel of the floorboards, the texture of the blankets, the whole thing. I learned to read so young that I can't even remember a time before books. I absolutely inhaled them. Folk tales, fairy stories, old legends, anything strange or enchanted. I loved it. But even as a little kid, I knew the difference between pretend and real. I never mixed those up. When I was very young, we lived in an old Florida cracker house. It was raised up on piers, with a metal roof and a wide porch wrapping around it. The front door opened into this long hallway that ran straight to the back door, and all the rooms branched off from that hall. It was one of those old houses that feels like it's holding its breath. The right side still had its original rooms, each with a fireplace and a door to the porch. The kitchen was at the far end. The left side had been changed over the years. One room had been split to make a bathroom and storage room, and the porch on that side had been enclosed into this long, narrow playroom. I was about 3 when we moved in, and it didn't take long for me to feel that we were not alone there. There were really 2 kinds of presences in that house. One of them terrified me. My bedroom was the middle room on the left side of the hall. Every night, a man would come through the fireplace, leading a horse. Not climbing out of it exactly, more like he and the horse were walking along their own path, and the house had somehow been built across it. He never looked at me. The horse never looked at me. Neither one ever spoke. But every single time, I would panic. I mean, absolute, screaming terror. There was something about that man that felt wrong in a way I can still barely describe. Pure meanness. Malice. I was convinced with every fiber of my little body that he was a bad man. My parents tried sleeping in my room for a few nights, but eventually they decided I didn't have to sleep there anymore. That solved at least that part of it. The other spirits in the house were different. They were children. A girl and her little brother. The girl's name was Elsie. She was around 5, a little bossy, a little motherly, and very sure of herself. Her brother, Johnny, was maybe 2 or so, and he showed up less often. He loved toy cars, and he loved being read to. Elsie liked fussing over my little brother, too. If he rode his tricycle down the hall and got stuck because he couldn't turn around, she would help him. And if I didn't want to do what she wanted to do, she'd get offended in this dramatic little pout. What's strange is they didn't look ghostly at all. They looked solid, ordinary. They just had this habit of appearing and disappearing so quickly it made your head spin. Whenever I talked about Elsie, nobody really believed me. My mother especially. She kept insisting Elsie was imaginary, and she thought I'd made up the name because people sometimes tried to call me Jessie, which I absolutely hated. So in her mind, Elsie was just my child brain version of that. But no, I knew the difference. And honestly, I was offended she thought I'd be that unoriginal. One day, my dad had built this huge cage at the far end of the playroom and filled it with parakeets. I loved watching them, though from a safe emotional distance, as it turned out. I was sitting there drawing one afternoon, perfectly happy, and Elsie wanted me to do something else. Probably play with dolls, which I hated even then. My grandmother kept trying to bless me with dolls, and I kept feeling cursed by them. I told Elsie she'd have to wait until I finished my drawing, and then suddenly, every bird was out. They were everywhere, flapping wildly around the room, and I just dropped down and started shrieking. My parents came running. My mother took me out of the room while my dad tried to catch the birds. Then my mother demanded to know why I had opened the cage. I told her I hadn't, that Elsie had. I hadn't actually seen her do it, but nobody else had been in there. My mother said I was lying, and I got punished for it. I was furious at Elsie, furious at my mother, and deeply traumatized by that whole storm of wings. Even now, if a bird flaps too close to my head, my nervous system still wants to evacuate the premises. Then came the day with my baby sister. She was born in February, during a cold stretch, and my mother had fires going in all the fireplaces to warm the house. My brother and baby sister were sleeping in the middle room on the right side. My mother was in the kitchen, keeping an ear on them. My brother was still very little, and at some point he decided the baby must be cold. So he pushed her bassinet as close to the fireplace screen as he could. Eventually, the bassinet caught fire. My mother said a little girl came running in to tell her the baby's bed was burning. She ran into the room and found it true, grabbed my sister out, opened the porch door, and shoved the flaming bassinet out into the yard. Naturally, she was shaken to the core. Once the baby was safe, she came looking for me and the girl who had warned her. I was all the way in the playroom, completely unaware of the chaos. She demanded to know who I had let into the house. There were some neighborhood girls I wasn't allowed to invite over, and she assumed it had been one of them. I told her, as calmly as I could, that it was probably Elsie. That did not improve her mood. She searched the whole house and couldn't find any little girl, of course, and then she turned that anger on me. She accused me of lying and threatened to punish me hard if I didn't tell the truth. Thankfully, my dad came home right about then. He pulled my mother aside, asked what had happened, and listened while she described the little girl who had warned her. Then he came and asked me what Elsie looked like. I described her: blonde hair in ringlets, a pale blue dress with a white collar, brown lace-up shoes. And apparently, that was exactly the same description my mother had just given him. My brother, little as he was, also said it had been Elsie. Not long after that, we moved out because my parents were splitting up. I was heartbroken. I lost regular time with my dad for a while, and my mother became more rigidly religious. After that, any mention of ghosts or anything from that house would set her off. She called everyone liars. She especially called me one. So for years, I carried all of that alone. When I was a teenager, I went to live with my dad. One day we were driving past that old house while it was being lifted and prepared to be moved, and I finally asked him about it. I said, "Can I ask you something about that house?" And he just laughed softly and said, "About the ghosts?" He told me he'd heard footsteps running down the hallway when no one was there. He told me he had seen the man with the horse, too. He even told me that one time, when my brother had ridden his tricycle down the hall and gotten stuck as usual, Dad had started to get up to turn him around, and before he could, the tricycle turned by itself. My brother wasn't touching the handlebars and he wasn't pedaling. Dad said he just laughed and said, "Well, thank you." And then he told me something I've never forgotten. On the day he was moving out, he was carrying the last of his things to the car when he looked up and saw a little blonde girl standing on the back porch. He looked again because, of course he did, but she was still there. Elsie. Just as I had always described her. She looked at him and said, "Please don't go." He told her he didn't really have a choice, but that he was sad too. Then he closed the car door, looked back, and she was gone. That conversation meant more to me than I can explain. For years, I'd been told I was crazy, dramatic, dishonest. And then my dad, in a few quiet minutes, gave me something I had needed for so long: validation. He believed me because he had seen it too. He even admitted my mother had threatened to make his life harder if he encouraged any of my beliefs about what happened in that house. So when I hear other people talk about strange experiences they had as children, especially the ones nobody believed, it still hits a nerve in me. I think about how vulnerable children are when they're frightened, and how much damage it does when the adults around them respond with ridicule instead of care. Maybe what a child senses in a place turns out to be nothing paranormal at all. Maybe it's stress, or atmosphere, or something they can't name yet. But sometimes, maybe, it isn't nothing. Either way, the answer should be the same. Listen to them. Take them seriously. Comfort them. Let them know they're not alone. That matters more than people realize. I was sitting with my mom one evening, just half watching TV, and we started talking about her father, my grandfather, who had passed away years ago. The room was calm, the kind of quiet that settles in when people are sharing old family memories. Then the ceiling light above us flickered. My mom got tense right away. Trying to lighten the mood, I laughed and said something like, "Maybe Grandpa's dropping by to say hello." She did not find that funny at all. And then, almost on cue, we both jumped because the blender in the kitchen suddenly roared to life. The kitchen was just down the hall, so we rushed in to see what was going on. My mom looked at me like I had set the whole thing up to scare her. I hadn't. Not even a little. The blender was plugged in, yes, but the switch itself wasn't turned on. I remember trying to brush it off, telling myself it had to be something ordinary, maybe a power glitch, something dull and explainable. We were still standing there going back and forth about it when this huge crash came from the living room. Not a little bump. A real, sharp bang that made both of us yell out. We ran back in and saw the coffee table had shifted in a way that made no sense. It was one of those older tables with a chrome frame and a thick sheet of glass resting on top. The glass sat on small metal supports covered with worn rubber sleeves, and over time those sleeves had gotten tacky. You couldn't just nudge the table and expect the glass to slide around. Even lifting the glass took a deliberate push from underneath to free it. It stayed put. Always. But now the glass was sitting crooked, off-center, like someone had lifted it, turned it slightly, and let it drop back down. That sound we heard? It fit perfectly. We were the only two people in the house. No pets, no shaking from traffic, no earthquake. Nothing obvious that could explain how that glass had moved. Honestly, it rattled both of us badly. Even my mom later said that if she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she never would have believed me. I'm still a skeptic by nature. I'm not desperate to call everything paranormal. If someone offered me a solid, logical explanation, I'd take that before jumping to the idea that my late grandfather had decided to make a dramatic entrance and terrify his daughter and granddaughter. But here's the part that still gets me. When we told my grandmother, I expected her to dismiss the whole thing immediately. She's practical, deeply religious, and not the type to entertain ghost stories or superstition. She believes in God, in common sense, and not much in between. So I thought she'd tell us we were being ridiculous. Instead, she went quiet for a moment and said it wouldn't surprise her if it had been her husband. Then she told us that years after he died, she woke up one morning to the bed shaking violently. Not subtly, really shaking. She said she couldn't explain why, but in that moment she just knew it was him, and she snapped out loud, "All right, stop that." The shaking stopped instantly. She said her heart was pounding afterward, and she got out of bed right away. Maybe it was a dream, maybe not, but she never laughed it off. And coming from her, that landed hard. She is the last person in the world I'd expect to tell a story like that. So that's what happened. I still don't know what to make of it. Maybe there's a sensible explanation I'm missing. Maybe there isn't. But I can tell you this. Whatever it was, it felt real when it happened, and neither my mom nor I has forgotten it. This happened a few years back, and I still can't explain it in any way that makes it feel smaller. My boyfriend and I had gotten into a bad argument, and he told me to leave for the night. At the time, we'd been staying in his old 1990 Silver Eagle coach, parked at a truck stop across from a budget motel. A few friends of mine were staying there, and when I headed toward the office, they waved me over and invited me in for a drink. One beer turned into a couple, and before long, I decided I'd just get my own room and stay there until morning. The motel had several long wings, and one of them had a reputation. People said there were things in that section, upstairs and downstairs, that never really left. Naturally, that was the wing where they put me. My room was one of the accessible ones. The first thing I noticed was the bathroom. I'd asked for a bathtub, but there wasn't one. Instead, there was this sliding barn-style door, which I actually thought was kind of neat at first. That changed the moment I tried to close it. Every time I slid it shut, it rolled right back open. I checked the track, thinking maybe it was crooked, but it looked perfectly normal. I turned off the bathroom light, shut the door again, and stood there watching it. A few seconds later, it slowly slid back open on its own. I dragged a chair over and wedged it against the door, thinking that would solve it. Somehow, the door still shifted the chair. Eventually, I got it to stay closed, or at least I thought I did. When I climbed into bed and looked over again, the bathroom door was open. The light was on too. At that point, I was too tired to care. I rolled over and went to sleep. Sometime later, while it was still dark, I woke up because I heard something breathing over me. Not just nearby, right over me. Heavy, slow breathing. I could actually feel the heat of it through the blankets, pressing against me. I cracked one eye open and turned to see what it was. Standing there was this enormous figure. It had to be at least 8 or 9 feet tall, with horns, a massive head, and these huge shoulders and arms. The kind of thing that should have terrified me instantly. But strangely, it didn't. I've had experiences my whole life. Things I can't neatly explain. So instead of screaming, I just looked at it and said, "Seriously?" Then I turned over and went back to sleep. Later, I dreamed my boyfriend was sitting in the chair I'd used against the bathroom door, except now the chair was by the front door of the motel room. He was smoking a cigarette, just staring at the door like he was waiting for something. I asked him how he got in and reminded him it was a non-smoking room. He turned to me, pressed a finger to his lips, and told me without words to be quiet. I remember thinking he must be hiding from someone, that maybe he'd convinced the front desk to let him in. I pulled the blankets up and drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up around 9:30. The chair was no longer by the bathroom door. It was sitting by the front door, exactly where it had been in the dream. The bathroom door was closed and the light was off. A few minutes later, there was a knock. I froze for a second, then crept over and looked through the lower peephole. It was my boyfriend, I opened the door and asked him how he found me. He said one of our friends had told him where I was after seeing how upset he'd been trying to track me down. I asked why he'd been so worked up, and he said, "Because I had this awful feeling in a dream that you were in danger, like something evil was after you." I just stood there. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. It felt like my whole body had turned to stone. When I finally found my voice, I told him everything that had happened that night. I told him about the thing standing over me, about the heat of its breath, about the chair moving, about the dream. I told him I thought what I'd seen looked like a minotaur or something close to it, some kind of ancient, impossible creature. And the strangest part was still this. When it happened, I wasn't afraid. Not then. The fear came later, all at once, like my body had waited until it was safe to react. Once it hit me, it hit hard. My chest tightened, my hands started shaking, and I spiraled into a full panic attack. I couldn't catch my breath. He calmed me down and told me that, in his dream, I had called out to him to come protect me from something evil. After I finally settled, I took a shower, got dressed, and left that place as fast as I could. But I've never forgotten that night. More than the shape of it, more than the horns or the size, what stayed with me was the heat. That awful, unnatural heat of something breathing over me while I slept. I was about 11 years old when I went up to Northern Oregon with my mother's half-sister. She was heading there with a group of migrant workers to earn money picking strawberries and cherries, and I came along to help watch her two little boys, who were still babies then. We'd been there maybe a couple of weeks, staying cramped in a trailer near the fields, when my aunt decided she wanted to rent a proper house since we were supposed to be there for most of the summer. So one afternoon, all of us piled into the truck and went looking. Then we found that house. I still remember it so clearly. It sat up where you could see forever, with this sweeping view of green land and sky that didn't even feel real. The house itself looked grand, almost too grand, like something from an old film. It was 2 stories tall, with heavy wooden French doors, and when those doors opened, right there in front of you was this wide staircase that curved upward, with polished wood and dark iron railing. It was beautiful, truly beautiful. But the second I stood on that porch, before I even stepped inside, something in me changed. I felt this deep, sudden heaviness. Not fear exactly, not at first. More like dread. Like loneliness so strong it had a shape. My aunt, though, was thrilled. She kept saying, "This is the one, this is the one." She was smiling, calling everybody from room to room, wanting us all to see how perfect it was. My cousin Mariella reached her hand out to me and said, "Come inside with us." So I did. I took maybe 5 or 6 steps into that house, and as I got close to the staircase, this red cloud came rushing down from upstairs. It looked like smoke, but not like any smoke I'd ever seen. It was dense and angry and bright, and it slammed into me so hard it knocked me flat onto the floor and drove the breath right out of me. I was lying there stunned, trying to breathe, and I watched that red cloud tear through the house. It rushed into one room, then another, then flew back upstairs and darted in and out of those rooms like it was searching, or raging, or both. The second I could move again, I scrambled for the door. And the moment my foot hit the porch, I heard Mariella crying. I turned around and there she was, sitting on the shiny wood floor near the bottom of the staircase, crying hard. I looked up just in time to see that red smoke glide into the room where my aunt was standing. But as it moved toward her, It changed. It got thinner, lighter, almost faded, like its anger had softened. I shouted to Mariella, "Come on!" She jumped up and ran toward me. And just like that, the red cloud turned dark again. Thicker, faster. It came straight at us. We leaped off the porch and ran to the truck as fast as we could. We climbed in, slammed the doors, and locked them. From where we were parked, we could still see inside because the house had those huge glass windows. We sat there, watching that red mass race through the rooms upstairs and downstairs like it owned the place. Then I glanced off to the side of the house, and I remember seeing this beautiful meadow. Just this wide stretch of green, lined with trees, peaceful as anything. It was such a strange contrast. One of the prettiest places I'd ever seen, sitting right beside something that felt deeply wrong. A few minutes later, everyone came back out to the truck. You could hear their footsteps in the gravel before they opened the doors. My aunt was still excited, oddly enough. More excited than anyone else. Like nothing had happened. As we drove away, I looked back and could still see that red cloud moving through the house. Only now it looked even bigger, darker. Nobody said much for a long while. Then finally, Mariella asked, real quiet, "Are we going to tell my mom something pushed us down?" That opened the whole thing up. The men riding with us started talking about how bad the house had felt to them. One of them turned and asked if we'd seen something inside that scared us. We said yes. Then another man said he had seen the devil in that house. Said it was red. Said it was evil. I told them, it pushed me first. Then it pushed Mariella. And one of the men looked at me and said something I never forgot. He said, "That's because you were the strongest one there. It was afraid of you." I asked him why it had gone pale and calm around my aunt. And he said, maybe because she knows black magic. At 11 years old, I didn't understand what he meant. Not really. But years later, I came to believe he was telling the truth. We never went back to that house, and no matter how hard my aunt tried afterward, she could never get anyone to answer her about renting it. Not once. So, I need to tell you about something that happened this weekend, because it has really stayed with me and I still cannot shake the feeling of it. My father-in-law, Nikos, passed away last year, in early July. My son and Nikos were never especially close. We saw my in-laws maybe once a month, and things were always cordial, just never deeply affectionate. Not bad, not warm, just somewhere in the middle. We live in Athens, and a few days ago, on Thursday, we left to go to my husband's village for a short summer stay, like we usually do. His parents had bought a stationary caravan there years ago, and every summer we spend about a week in it. I mention this because both the caravan and the car we're using now originally belonged to my late father-in-law, so his presence is already tied to both in a way. While we were driving there, my husband suddenly told me something that completely threw me. He said he had seen his father's face reflected in the car window while driving. Not once, but twice. The first time had been earlier in the week when he was driving his work van, and the second time was just minutes before he told me. I honestly did not know what to say. My husband is the last person to believe in anything spiritual. He usually teases me for even entertaining those ideas, so for him to say that, and say it seriously, really unsettled me. Anyway, we arrived at the village, and everything seemed normal enough. We had our 15-year-old son with us, along with two of his friends, boys aged 13 and 16. Then on Saturday evening, we had to leave unexpectedly because of an emergency with my dog. All the vets in the village were closed, so we packed up and headed back to Athens. On the drive home, my son was sitting in the back with his friends. They were chatting, laughing, asking us to stop somewhere because they were hungry. I had one earbud in and was listening to an anxiety meditation, trying to calm myself because I was already so worried about my dog. After a while, I noticed the boys had gone quiet. I assumed they were tired. About 15 minutes later, my son suddenly asked us to stop the car and get him a pill from the luggage because his head was hurting badly. He looked awful, really pale and distressed. I asked him what was wrong, and he just held his head and said, "Please just give me a painkiller. I'll tell you later." He looked deeply shaken. We stopped at a service station and I asked again if he felt sick or dizzy. And then he looked at me and said, "I saw Grandpa," and immediately burst into tears. That alone was enough to make my heart drop. My son is not dramatic. He is not interested in spirits or anything supernatural, just like his father. And he would never cry like that in front of his friends unless he was truly terrified. I told the other boys to step out for a bit and went with them to get food. While we were away, I asked the older one what had happened. He told me my son had suddenly gone completely still and was staring straight ahead at the window in front of him. At first, the boy thought he was joking, like pretending to freeze for fun. He even pretended to fall asleep, expecting my son to snap out of it and laugh. But he didn't. He just sat there, eyes open, fixed on one spot, not moving, for what felt like around 10 minutes. Then he leaned back, grabbed his head, and asked for a painkiller. Later, my husband told me more, and when we finally got home and my son was lying in bed, I asked him to tell me exactly what he had experienced in his own words. He said that all at once, everything around him went black. He could not hear us, could not speak, could not feel the car anymore. Then he said he was suddenly seeing the living room in my in-laws' house. He said he could see the sofa where his grandfather used to sleep. And on that sofa was the framed photo of his grandfather, the one that is really there now because my mother-in-law placed it there after he died. Then he saw his grandmother, still alive, walk toward the photo and touch it. He said she was dressed in black. And while she was touching the picture, he heard his grandfather laugh, but in a cold, almost mocking way. He did not see him directly, only heard the laugh. Then he said, a dark shadow came quickly and took his grandmother away. Right after that, he was suddenly back in the car. He told me his head was pounding, and he was so frightened he did not know what to do. And when he repeated this to me later, he started crying all over again. I am honestly very worried. My son is healthy. He is not prone to this kind of thing. He does not believe in spirits, does not seek out scary ideas, and would never invent something like this for attention, especially not in front of his friends. He was truly terrified. I do not know what to make of it. Was it his grandfather? If it was, why would he frighten him like that? Or was it something else entirely? Whatever it was, it did not feel comforting. It felt heavy, dark even. My uncle thinks maybe my father-in-law was not such a kind man underneath, and maybe he did not like all of us, or even the dogs, being in his caravan. But still, what my son saw seemed to be mostly about his grandmother, and that is the part that troubles me most. I want to tell you about two experiences I had when I was very young, probably around 4 or 5. Even now, when I think back on them, they still feel vivid in a way that's hard to explain. The first happened during a time when my mom was seeing a man who lived in an apartment across town. Whenever she went to visit him, I usually went with her because I was so little. I remember their place together always felt full of music. They would put records on, laugh, and dance around the living room, while I kept myself busy nearby with little toys or whatever I could find to play with. One night, the three of us were all trying to sleep in his bedroom. I remember lying there wide awake, unable to settle down. My eyes kept drifting around the room until I found myself staring at one corner near the ceiling, right where the walls met. For some reason, I couldn't stop looking at it. It felt like I'd been staring there for a very long time. Then, I noticed something forming in that corner. It looked like a dark, smoky cloud, almost like a black mist gathering itself together. I froze. I didn't scream or say anything at first. I just kept watching as it grew larger. After a moment, I reached over and started shaking my mom's shoulder to wake her up. I still couldn't take my eyes off that corner. When she opened her eyes, I quietly told her, "Look up." She did, and right away she gasped. Then she woke her boyfriend, and when he saw it too, he got up immediately. We all rushed out of the room, down the stairs and outside the apartment. I remember standing there in the cool night air while the two of them talked in low, uneasy voices, trying to figure out what we had just seen. Eventually, he went back inside by himself, turning on every light as he moved through the apartment. When we followed him back to the bedroom, the corner was empty. There was nothing there at all. No dark cloud, no stain, nothing. We stood there for a while, unsettled, and in the end, they decided we should all stay in the living room for the rest of the night. So that's what we did. The second experience happened at my grandmother's house. She always kept little things there for me to play with. Toy cars, wooden blocks, plastic soldiers, things like that. Her house was small and cozy, a one-story place where the television was almost always on, and she was usually nearby doing something with her hands. One afternoon, I was in the hallway playing with a handful of army men on the floor. My grandmother was just around the corner in the living room, sitting in her chair, watching old shows and working on a blanket. While I was playing, this heavy feeling suddenly came over me. It was the kind of feeling that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. I looked up, and there in the hallway was something I still struggle to describe. It was dark, almost completely black, and it stretched across much of the hallway. Its outline looked rough and uneven, and it hovered above the floor instead of touching it. Scattered across it were small, glowing red dots that reminded me, in a strange way, of little eyes in a cartoon. It started drifting toward me. The second I saw it moving in my direction, I jumped up and ran. I flew around the corner into the living room, past my grandmother, and straight to the window. There were thin white curtains there, almost transparent, with delicate patterns stitched into them. I remember some of the shapes looked like little angels with trumpets. I hid myself behind those curtains, even though, looking back, it wasn't much of a hiding place at all. My grandmother looked over at me and asked in this light, cheerful voice, "Are you hiding?" I didn't answer. I just stayed still and waited. But nothing came around the corner. Nothing entered the living room. After a while, I stepped out from behind the curtains and stayed close to my grandmother for the rest of the day. Much later, once I finally worked up the courage, I went back to look down the hallway. There was nothing there, not a single sign of what I'd seen. Even so, I've never forgotten the feeling of it. I want to tell you about something that happened years ago, and even now, it still sits heavy with me. It started late one evening. I was with a friend of mine who has since passed away. I'll call him Ricky. He was one of those people who carried a lot of pain quietly, and underneath everything, he really did have a soft heart. Back then, though, neither of us was in a good place. I was deep into cocaine at the time, and Ricky was fighting his own demons too. That night, after doing line after line like it was nothing new to us, we cracked open a couple of beers, lit some cigarettes, and headed out for a walk through the neighborhood. It was one of those dim, hushed nights where the streets feel half asleep. The drugs had us completely spun out, and when we got like that, we talked in ways we normally wouldn't. We'd say the darkest things out loud. In a twisted way, it felt like therapy. All the anger, all the hurt, all the buried ugliness would come pouring out. As we walked, the conversation turned dark, real dark. Somehow we got onto the subject of murder, and I hate even saying that now. Sober, we were both sensitive people, but that night we felt reckless, disconnected, almost possessed by our own worst thoughts. We started talking about how easy it would be to hurt somebody, some stranger out alone at night. Just saying things that should never have been said. And then, it happened. Out of nowhere, I heard this growl. I still can't describe it properly. It wasn't just loud, it felt like it went through me, like it shook something loose inside my chest. I felt it in my stomach, in my bones, across my skin. It was the kind of sound that makes every instinct in your body wake up at once, like something was warning me, like something was snapping me back to reality. I looked up, and there, a little ways ahead of us, were two small red eyes glowing in the dark. At first, it looked like a dog, maybe medium-sized, but the longer I stared, the wronger it felt. Its body looked shadowy, almost half-transparent, like it was flickering. The best way I can explain it is this. It reminded me of an old television on a dead channel, that grainy static, except darker, denser, almost alive. It didn't look like any normal animal I'd ever seen. The second I locked eyes with it, I stopped cold. I put my arm out across Ricky's chest to keep him from moving and said, "Do you see that?" He didn't answer right away. It took him a couple seconds, and then he went completely silent. That silence told me everything. Without saying another word, we both started backing up slowly, eyes fixed on that thing the whole time. We kept stepping backward until it finally disappeared from view. We stood there at the end of the block trying to make sense of it. Part of us wondered if it was just the drugs, if maybe we'd let our minds run too far. But another part of me knew better. I knew what I'd felt. Still, after a few minutes we went back. There was nothing there. No dog, no movement, no sound. We even wandered the area for close to an hour, checking side yards, alleys, the whole stretch of street. Nothing. Eventually we gave up and went back to his place. When we got there, we didn't really talk. We just sat in silence for a long time, like neither of us wanted to be the first one to say what we were both thinking. Because whatever that was, it didn't feel like something ordinary. I've thought about it so many times since then. And I know how this sounds, I really do. But in my gut, I never believed that thing was just a dog. It felt like something else entirely. Something not meant for this world. Something that had shown up for a reason. About a month later, Ricky died of a heart attack. By then, things had gotten even worse for us. We'd started mixing heavy opiates in with the cocaine. He already had heart problems, so looking back, it's not hard to see how dangerous that was. He wasn't in a good state mentally either. Truthfully, neither was I. But with him, it felt deeper, like he was carrying a kind of exhaustion in his soul. He used to say, during late-night drives, "I'm probably not going to live long anyway, so I might as well get as high as I can on the way there." Those were his words, not mine, and I've never forgotten them. To this day, I still think about that thing we saw. I think about the timing. I think about the way it appeared right when we were talking about doing something truly evil. I think about the growl and the feeling that came with it, like a warning dropped straight into my body. Maybe it was an omen. Maybe it was there for him. Maybe it was there for both of us. I don't know. What I do know is that underneath all the drugs and all the darkness, Ricky was not a cruel person. He was wounded. He was lost. But he was gentle in ways that mattered. So when I think back on that night, I don't claim to understand what we saw or what it meant. I just know it was real. And I know I've never looked at the world quite the same way since. I want to tell you about something that's stayed with me for most of my life. Even now, talking about it makes my chest tighten a little. When I was really young, maybe around 4, I lived in a small apartment with my mom for part of the week, and then I'd stay with my dad the rest of the time. My parents had split when I was still a baby, so that back and forth was just normal to me. My mom shared that apartment with another woman, Marissa, and her little daughter, who was close to my age. That place is where the nightmares started. They weren't the kind you forget after breakfast. They felt sharp, detailed, almost physical. I still remember them in pieces so clearly it's unsettling. At night, I always fell asleep with a movie playing on the VCR in my room. Usually I'd wake up at some point and see that blue TV screen glowing in the dark after the tape had finished. It almost became a kind of comfort, like a little artificial nightlight. But one night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom, and the room felt wrong immediately. The TV wasn't glowing. It was off. The room was darker than usual, and I had this awful feeling that something was there with me, hiding, just waiting for me to move. So, in my little kid mind, I made a plan. Get out of bed fast, run to the door, make it to the bathroom. I jumped up, rushed to my bedroom door, grabbed the handle, and it was locked. That terrified me instantly, because that door didn't even have a lock. And right after that thought hit me, I heard the closet door open. I looked over, but all I could see was darkness. Then suddenly, I was on my back inside the closet. I was kicking, screaming, crying, trying to get away from something I couldn't fully see. I knew something was in there with me. I felt completely trapped, completely helpless. I remember the panic starting to drain into this numb kind of surrender, like some part of me realized no one was coming. What I remember most clearly, strangely enough, is the carpet. I could feel the fibers brushing against my fingers above my head, and I kept focusing on that sensation, almost like I was trying to prove to myself that it was real, or prove that I was awake. At one point, I could see through the crack in the closet door. My room was lit again, and I saw my mom sitting there on the floor, so calm, painting her toenails like nothing was wrong. I cried out to her one last time. She didn't react. She didn't hear me, and I just lay there in silence. Then I woke up. Morning light, TV still off. I'd wet the bed, and honestly, that was the beginning of all of it. I never told my mom. I never told my dad either. Even now, I still don't know what to call that experience. A nightmare, obviously, but it never felt like just a nightmare. Not long after that, I started having another dream over and over again. In that one, I'd wake up in this room that looked kind of like a motel room. The carpet was this dull green color. To my right, there was an old telephone lying off the hook on the floor. To my left was a bed, and there was just enough space underneath it to see the floor on the other side. That's where I'd see them first. Hooves. Just a pair of them, pacing back and forth. I'd slowly lift my head high enough to look over the edge of the bed, and there it was. This thing. Its lower half looked animal, almost horse-like. Its torso was human. It had on this faded red pullover, which somehow made it feel even more wrong, more specific. And its head. Its head was like some kind of deer or elk skull with massive antlers. It never seemed frantic exactly, but it was searching, looking for something. Maybe me. Then I'd wake up. I had that same dream more times than I can count when I was a kid. And the strangest part is, they mostly faded after my mom and I moved out of that apartment. Years later, when I was in high school, things got strange again. One night, a friend slept over, and we crashed in the living room. The next morning, he asked me where I'd gone in the middle of the night. I told him I hadn't gone anywhere, that I'd been asleep right there the whole time. But he insisted he'd woken up, heard movement, looked over, and I was gone. A different friend had an even weirder story. The next morning, he asked me if my house was haunted. I kind of laughed it off and asked why. He told me he woke up during the night and saw this tall shadow bent over me while I slept. He said it scared him so badly that he just shut down and tried to convince himself he was dreaming. That stuck with me. Then, fast forward to adulthood. I've been living with my girlfriend for years now, and not long after we started sharing a place, she said something that gave me that same old feeling all over again. One night, she told me she woke up and saw something floating above me while I slept. She said it looked like a tangled knot of black thread just hanging there in the air. I told her she was probably exhausted, that her eyes were playing tricks on her. I wanted that explanation to be true. But then another night, she had a dream. In the dream, we were lying in bed together, talking, laughing, everything completely normal. Then she noticed something near my head. She said there was a man there, something deeply wrong about him, like pure malice, and he was somehow woven into my hair above me. She said in the dream she felt like she had to pretend she didn't see him. That part really got to me, because when I was little, whenever I felt that presence around me, I used to tell myself the exact same thing. Don't let it know you're scared. Don't react. Don't acknowledge it. Because if it knows you see it, it gets closer. I know how this all sounds, and I know memory, dreams, fear, and coincidence can do strange things to a person. Maybe that's all this is. Maybe it started with childhood night terrors, and my mind's built a mythology around them. I've considered that plenty of times. But even with all that said, some part of me still feels like there's been something following me through different chapters of my life. Not always visible, not always active, just there. And there's more, honestly. More moments, more things people have said, more nights I still can't explain. But even this much feels heavy to say out loud. So I guess I'm telling you because I've carried it alone for a long time, and part of me still wonders whether anyone else has lived with something like this too. I want to tell you about something that happened to me a few months ago, because honestly, I still think about it. I have never really been able to explain it, and part of me still wonders what it was. A close friend of mine, Camille, comes from an old French family with a lot of history behind it. Her father's side has this aristocratic background, the kind with old family stories, heirlooms, and furniture that has been passed down for generations. And with those pieces came a lot of strange legends too. One of the items in her apartment was this antique vanity with a mirror brought over from France. According to her family, sometime in the 1800s, a young woman died while sitting in front of it. I never knew how seriously to take that story, but I remembered it. Then one night in 2024, Camille had a few people over at her apartment. It was a small gathering, nothing wild, and by the time everyone left, it was around 2 in the morning. She went to sleep in her bed, and I stayed over, trying to get comfortable on the couch. The room was dim, not completely dark, and at first everything seemed fine. I did not feel panicked. I did not even feel especially scared. But there was this quiet, nagging feeling that I was not alone. It felt like someone was watching me. I kept trying to brush it off. I closed my eyes and told myself I was just overtired. But the longer I lay there, the stronger that feeling became. Then it shifted into something worse. It was like every instinct in me suddenly woke up and said, "Something is wrong." I became aware of what felt like a presence standing right beside the couch near my feet. I cannot explain how I knew. I just did. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, hoping that if I ignored it, the feeling would pass. And then, I felt something touch my foot. Not a draft, not the blanket settling, not one of those half-dream sensations your brain invents when you are drifting off. I felt pressure right near my foot, on the couch itself, and the blanket moved against me in a way that felt deliberate. It was so specific, so solid, that my immediate thought was that someone had reached toward me and stopped at the last second. My eyes flew open. For just a moment, I could still feel that pressure, which is part of why this has stayed with me. It did not feel like a dream, and I had not even fallen asleep yet. I was fully awake, just lying there with my eyes closed. At first, I thought maybe Camille had gotten up and passed by without me hearing her. Maybe she brushed the couch by accident. That would have made sense. So I turned my head toward my feet, and there was a figure standing there. It looked human in shape, just this dark silhouette looming beside the couch. The room was dim enough that I could make out the furniture and the outline of the room, but this thing was darker than everything else. It stood out in a way that made no sense. The second I saw it, this wave of cold went through me, and every part of me was saying, "Get out, now." I blinked and looked away for half a second. When I looked back, it was gone. I turned immediately to check on Camille. She was still in bed, completely asleep, not moving. I grabbed my phone and used the screen light to look around. There was nothing near my feet, nothing on the couch, nothing in the room that could have created a shape like that, nothing that explained what I had felt or what I had seen. I cannot tell you what it was. I just know my whole body was telling me not to stay there another second. So I picked up my bag, put on my shoes, and left. And as strange as this sounds, walking alone outside in New York at 2:30 in the morning felt safer than staying one more minute in that apartment.